In 1830, Joseph Smith published the Book of Mormon to the world, claiming to have translated it himself from Reformed Egyptian. He also claimed to have translated it by the gift and power of God. But what if some parts of the Book of Mormon appear not to have come from God, but from a well-known Bible commentary of Joseph Smith's day? What would that say about the translation process itself? All this and more we discuss tonight on Mormonism Live.
All right. How are you, RFM?
I'm great. Thank you so much, Bill Reel. How was that intro? Was that good? Was that a grabber?
That was a nice cold open, as I guess they call it. So that was great.
Okay, I keep working on these. What goes on behind the scenes is we're going along jauntily and merrily, and then all of a sudden it's like 2 minutes till, and one of us says, "Oh, did you get that? Did you do your opening?" And then I'm just furiously typing something up so I can read it. Okay. Anyway, going to be a great show tonight, Bill. What do you want to say before we get to the show?
First off, you and I had a conversation, maybe, I don't know, it was at least a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, where you noted that this upcoming episode, tonight's episode, you said something along the lines of that this is the most important academic discovery in Mormonism. And I think you said in your lifetime. And I thought in my head,
That's a long time.
that's a long time. A lot of things have happened.
Maybe only 60 years.
A lot has happened. This couldn't possibly be that big. And then I read Colby Townsend's paper and I thought it's that big. And so tonight we're going to go into that. I will just note, folks, please, if you're watching this, please hit the like button. Please subscribe. We're glad you're here. To our Mormonism Live audience and anybody else joining us maybe for the first time or checking us out, we really appreciate you being here. And with that, RFM, I'm happy to jump into it as soon as you want to.
Okay. Well, what I want to do first off is set the table for what we're going to be talking about tonight so that you'll know. Now, Colby Townsend himself, the man, the myth, the legend, just in case he does watch at some point in the future, he's too busy to come on the show. And frankly, from what he told me he has on his plate, I'm surprised he can do everything that he is doing. So I definitely understand that. We've communicated back and forth since this we started deciding, since this paper came out. And I first congratulated him on it, and we've been communicating, as I say, but he can't make it, and it doesn't look likely he'd be able to make it anytime in the near future. So here we go. Without him. Now, this is Colby with a C, by the way. Colby Townsend, not to be confused with Colby Reddish. That's Colby with a K. There we go. Now, we're calling this tonight's show the Great and Abominable Plagiarism. And the reason for that hopefully will become clear as we proceed.
Yeah, so to just set the table and then turn the time over to RFM to sort of lead us into this conversation, several years ago now at this point, this was 2017, Thomas Wayment, professor at BYU, and student Haley Lamont were working on a project together, and it ended up being titled A Recently Recovered Source, Rethinking Joseph Smith's Bible Translation. And in this, Thomas Wayman and Haley Lamont present evidence that Joseph Smith utilized Adam Clarke's commentary for the Joseph Smith translation. And this was a big deal when this happened. This ended up leading to Haley Lamont losing her testimony and stepping away from the church. There were several apologists who tried to tackle this, but it seems like to this moment, the church, although not quite in exactly official channels, has adapted or adopted this perspective. So
got to interrupt here, Bill. Not only did she do those things, she also did an interview with you. You got the scoop on this interview with Haley. And you keep saying Lamont, but I think it was Wilson at the time. And is Lamont her married name or vice versa?
Yeah, Haley Wilson Lamont. So I think either Wilson's her maiden name or middle name, and Lamont, I think, is now her last name. But
yeah. So
So yeah,
anyway, I
we
just wanted to say that, but you scooped everybody with that interview. But the condition was that you got the scoop so early. She was still a student at BYU. It was the spring, I think 2017. And she put you under a blood oath of sorts that if she were to do this interview with you, it was recorded that you could not release it publicly until after she had graduated from BYU because she did not want an interview to rob her of her diploma.
because if you run counter to what the church asks you to do, which is to keep your testimony and to remain faithful and to keep a temple recommend, you not only can, sort of get the raised eyebrow of the church, but you can actually have all of your credits from the very beginning of your freshman year taken away from you, and you would have to start your education entirely over. I say all that to say that BYU scholarship with Wayment and Lamont set the stage for tonight's conversation because it's the first time where someone comes forward and goes, "Hey, by the way, I think Joseph Smith is using Adam Clarke's commentary or parts of his translation process." And apologists have ways around the Joseph Smith translation by simply taking this inspired, uh, putting the Bible back into its perfect form from a corrupted form, has just been changed to a flawed Bible commentary. And there's not really wiggle room there, but because Mormons place less emphasis on the Joseph Smith translation, and because of what it is, I think there's more wiggle room than what we're going to talk about tonight. And so, with all that research having been done, now folks, including Colby, are going back into Joseph Smith's translation productions and are just checking to see if maybe Adam Clarke is in other places too. And so, with that, I'll turn the time over to you, Mr. Radio Free Mormon.
Thank you so much. I was just about to nitpick just a bit. I've been known to nitpick and also be somewhat psychotic from time to time. But the nitpicking is, I think that there are others, including Ronald Huggins and possibly Stan Larson, who had seen one or two of such connections in the Book of Mormon and Bible commentaries of Joseph Smith's day, including Adam Clarke's, prior to this publication. But anyway, other than that, yeah, it's sort of coming together. And now we have capping off the scholarship as of this point in time, which is April 2nd, 2025, that we're recording this. As of this point in time comes Colby Townsend's paper, which now argues and seeks to demonstrate that Joseph Smith, now, this is limited, okay? It's a limited paper, and it's limited to this. It's limited to the Isaiah chapters in the Book of Mormon. It's not any time or any chapter or any Bible quote, only Isaiah, the Isaiah chapters in the Book of Mormon. And then it's comparing those Isaiah chapters in the Book of Mormon, not with any Bible commentary, but specifically with the Adam Clarke Bible commentary. So it is very limited in that regard. All right. So that's what this paper is. And even so, in this paper, it seems that Colby Townsend is demonstrating, I think persuasively, that Joseph Smith, in translating the Book of Mormon, accessed ideas and used ideas and even language and words from the Adam Clarke commentary in the Book of Mormon, Isaiah chapters. So would you like me to advance these slides? That would make sense, wouldn't it?
You should be able to.
Okay. All right. So here is where we're going to talk for the first half of this show. And here I'm setting the table again. We'll get to the feast in a second. Two parts. First part, we're going to talk about commentaries and different things in commentaries and things in the New Testament, especially the Old Testament too, but mainly the New Testament with these examples. And then we're going to use that as an example and as an illustration so that hopefully everybody who's watching can better follow along and understand what it is that Colby Townsend is saying in his paper and why it's so monstrously important. This is indeed one of the most significant papers in Mormon studies, if not Book of Mormon studies, in my lifetime. So here we go. Bible commentaries. We have always had Bible commentaries ever since there's been a Bible. Someone wants to say what they think about it, and they've got some education or just some opinions, and they write them down, right? So we have commentaries, and this is one of the commentaries that I have. And this is the Oxford Bible Commentary. Now, as big as this thing is, I'm not kidding, that's just gravity. Okay? As big as this is commentary only. There is no Bible in it. Okay? Now we've got a picture here because they didn't want to try and open this up in front of you live and knock the microphone out of the way. That's a page. So this is all it is. Double columns, top to bottom, every page for over 1,000 pages. You've got commentary, which means you got to have your Bible with you, right? You have to have your Bible so you can read it. And then it references at the top of each paragraph the chapter and verses that the commentary relates to. So that is one kind of commentary. Now, here's another kind. And this is going to be much more similar to what Adam Clarke's commentary ends up looking like, which is why I'm going to spend some time with it, all right? This is my new Oxford Annotated Bible. It is a red Bible. It's right here in front of me. That's why I can't find it. Had this for a while. It got me into a lot of hot water when I was using it to teach the gospel doctrine class back from 2006 to 2010. But there it is. Now, it is not just the Bible. And really, it's kind of hard to find a Bible that's just the Bible anymore. You're going to have some footnotes. You're going to have some cross references, usually, right? But here's the New Revised Standard Version. It contains the entire text of the Old and New Testaments, which you would expect. It's a new version, a very, very well-received and highly regarded translation. And New Testaments. It also has the Apocrypha. Now, the Apocrypha, if you don't know, are the 14 or so books that can appear in some Bibles, usually Catholic Bibles, but also in other Bibles sometimes, like Joseph Smith's Bible. He had the Apocrypha. And these are 14 books between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and they are generally, if they're included in a Bible at all. Oh, Dan Vogel saying Brent Metcalf, I believe, has originals of Clarke's commentary. Originals. Holy wow. Yeah, that would be valuable, I'm guessing. Okay, so you've got the Apocrypha, you got the 14 books in between. If they're included at all, they are marked off from the Old and New Testament. They're kept together because they don't have authoritative force like the other scriptures are considered to by believers in the Bible. So there's also in the new Oxford Annotated Bible, there's footnotes on each page and cross references, right? And also, in addition to footnotes, there's commentary on each page. And at the end, there's essays on specific subjects. So there's a lot of information in a Bible like this new Oxford Annotated Bible that you might not get in just a regular Bible. That's just a picture of it together. Now, the long ending of Mark. If you'll hang on for just a second here, we'll have an example of this, what it looks like inside in a second as we go on. But here's what I want to do with the first 20 minutes or so. We're going to go through this Bible. And I picked out 3 examples of notes in the Bible where the scholars who put it together, you know, they've gone over ancient manuscripts. There's more than one manuscript for each of these books that are in the Bible. Some of them have hundreds of manuscripts, some not so many. And amongst the manuscripts, they have differences between manuscripts. So then there's a question of which is the earliest, which is the most authoritative version of this, which should be used. And that is a constant source of disagreement. Although with some things, they have been so obviously added to later manuscripts of the Bible books. And it's so obvious because the earlier ones that we have either have it or don't have it, you know, depending upon what it is. And then it either gets added or subtracted later on. So you can almost see it happening over the course of the text as they get older and older, or I should say newer and newer and closer in time to us. So that can happen. And these are examples of that. There's not a whole lot of debate about these. But what I'm saying is this. If I try and put myself in the position of Joseph Smith and think, or one version of Joseph Smith, all right? This hypothetical version of Joseph Smith is creating a book that is ancient, and he's going to translate it. And the book itself says that one of the main purposes of the book is to restore things that were taken out of the Bible. Then you get to Isaiah, and there's a lot of Isaiah quoted in the Bible, in the Book of Mormon too. It's quoted in the Book of Mormon, but a lot, chapters and chapters and chapters. So if you've got the Book of Mormon saying that the purpose of the Book of Mormon, one of the purposes is to restore things that are going to be taken out of the Bible. And then you've got all these chapters from the Bible, Isaiah. Would it not make sense to consult a well-known and highly regarded Bible commentary to see what Adam Clarke has to say about it in order to try and make your Bible look more like an ancient Bible before it became corrupted? Now, I kind of shifted out of my original plan there, because what I was going to say, it's obvious enough. I don't think it was going to surprise anybody, is that if I were to try and set myself that goal, right, I'm going to write a Bible and I'm going to try and make it as close to the original as I possibly can. I can claim revelation for it. It doesn't make any difference what I claim for it. But the idea is that academically, the best thing I could do would be to go to a commentary like the New Oxford Annotated Bible and read through it as I'm translating or scribing it or dictating it, right? Dictated, and incorporate some of those changes that are in the footnotes. So let's see how easy this would be. Here's the long ending of Mark. Now, the long ending of Mark is in Mark 16. It's the ending, right? It's the part that talks about, and these signs shall follow them that believe. In my name shall they cast out devils. They shall speak with new tongues, take up serpents. You know, the whole deal, right? Now, the issue here, the issue with Mark is that according to the majority of scholars, this is a highly held, widely held opinion, is that this was not original to Mark, that Mark actually ended much earlier. And by that, I mean within the same chapter, but, much earlier in the chapter of 16 in Mark. So that this is a long ending that came to be added to it later on. So that's why it's called, it even has its own name, the long ending of Mark. So I have Mormon chapter 9 on the right side of the slide, only to comment that this is a double problem for the Book of Mormon, because not only should the Book of Mormon here not be aware of the Gospel of Mark to be able to quote from it, they end up quoting from the long ending of Mark that was almost certainly never there originally.
Yeah, those both work against the faithful narrative of how the Book of Mormon came to be. Ancient prophets in the Americas, completely separated by time and geography from those in the Old World, should have had no access. Again, they brought the brass plates over. They had the Old Testament, but they don't have the New Testament. Hence, why is Mark in the Book of Mormon anyway? And then why is a section of Mark that wasn't even original to Mark in there on top of that?
Right. It's a double whammy. But all of this doesn't get us quite yet to the point here. This is just a bit of a side jog. This is the commentary here, the New Oxford Annotated Bible. That's what it looks like on the inside. So there you got Mark. It shows us Mark chapter 16, and you have the text of Mark in the top half of the page. If you look in the right column at the very bottom, you'll see there's just a few little notes there. Those are the footnotes. I call those the footnotes, okay? And then beneath that, almost half the page, that's commentary. So that's how much commentary there can be on these kinds of Bible commentaries. And it's full of wonderful information that helps you understand what on earth it's saying. And a lot of times it gives you hints and ideas about what was original to the text, what was changed, and what shouldn't have been there in the first place. And of course, it does have that. This is famous, as I say. There's not only a longer ending of Mark, there are people who have theorized that there was a shorter ending of Mark. But basically, all I have to know is that there's a longer ending of Mark. And so it's reflected here. This is a huge step to take, by the way, for a very important and significant Bible company, Oxford, to be publishing it in this way, because you have to have overwhelming evidence before you're going to interrupt and identify the Bible text. I mean, my gosh, as something quite likely other than what it might look like. So they got the shorter ending of Mark, that's that, and then the longer ending of Mark, and then it continues all the way through. Now, if you look at the footnotes there, I'm going to have a closer thing, but that's where it talks about it. Up there in the footnote, and then also down here below in the commentary, it talks about it as well. That there have been 2 attempts to provide a more satisfactory ending to the Gospel of Mark. All right. So the point of this is this. If I'm trying to create a Bible that by revelation given to me restores what was anciently, and I'm reading through this Bible and this commentary, it would be natural for me to get rid of the long ending of Mark. Because that's going to make it look older, right? All right. The problem is, of course, that if you go through, let's say your LDS Bible, okay, if you read through Mark and a lot of Bibles, you're just going to read through and you're not going to have any indication that there's any problem with that textual history. You get something else, Jesus sweating blood, right? Now, Jesus sweating blood is found in only one gospel. It's the Gospel of Luke. Yeah, Luke. And here it is in the Oxford Bible commentary and annotated. Then an angel from heaven appeared. This is in Gethsemane. Then an angel appeared from heaven, appeared to him and gave him strength. In his anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down on the ground. Now, you'll notice that that is preceded and ended by double brackets, right? So if you go down there, and it also has a footnote, D, go down to D, it says other ancient authorities lack verses 43 and 44. This is generally accepted that this part was added sometime much later, probably for dramatic effect, but there was nothing in the original having anything to do about Jesus having drops of blood come from every pore or sweating drops of blood at every pore, which ends up being a problem, of course, for the Book of Mormon, when in Mosiah 3:7, by the way, that's the only place in the New Testament or in the entire Bible, to my knowledge, that Jesus, of course, Jesus is not in the Old Testament, contrary to public opinion. But there's nothing in the Gospels other than that passage about him sweating blood because of the pain and the agony. And the only other place I think it appears in the standard works is the Book of Mormon, Mosiah 3:7, for behold, blood cometh from every pore. So great shall be his anguish for the wickedness and the abominations of his people. Now that's problematic. Once again, this is the old one too. It's problematic because it obviously comes from Luke. I suppose someone could say, King Benjamin had the same vision or whatever. I don't know. They can say whatever they want. The problem is it looks like it came from Luke, except it wasn't in Luke originally. It got added later. So once again, we have the Book of Mormon apparently borrowing from a passage that was not original to the New Testament.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. And you're setting the tone sort of with some soft ones that they're problematic for the Book of Mormon, but they're things that Joseph Smith left in.
And thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, because you brought me back to the main point, which I want to make after each of these 3 examples, which is, so if I want to create a Bible, it's going to look like it's original. I'm going to not include that. If I know it, that's the whole thing. I have to know it to not include it. And if revelation is not really available to me, then it would be helpful to have another source of information. The story of the woman caught in adultery. This is also very famous, and I think almost universally accepted that was never part of the original Gospel of John. It's only in John that appears, that story, and that it was much later. It's a wonderful story. It's a beautiful story. It teaches a beautiful sentiment, and it's almost certain that Jesus never said it, and that it's a late addition. So this was, I didn't bother, taking a shot of the entire page. We all know the story. But this is from the most ancient authorities lack, chapter 7, verse 53 through chapter 8, verse 11. That's the whole story. And in the commentary right below, it also says the woman caught in adultery. This episode is not found in the most authoritative manuscripts. Okay. So I mean, if I see this, if this is what I'm going by and I want to try and make it look old, I'll get rid of that. I'll do something with it, right? Because now I've got the clue from somebody who's really smart enough to have a Bible commentary, for crying out loud. So that's what I wanted to mention. Now I'm going to go to a fourth example here, and I want you to give me any comments that you have on this before I go on. But in the fourth example, example is going to segue directly into our subject, because the fourth example is going to be going from this to showing that Joseph Smith did the exact same thing in the Book of Mormon. And it's an example that's not in Colby Townsend's paper because it doesn't have to do with Isaiah. It has to do with Matthew. Okay.
Which, just to note on the onset, Matthew shouldn't be in the Book of Mormon either.
No, he got lost. He got turned around. Yeah.
That Sea of Galilee goes and goes and goes. Yeah.
All right. So here we go now with. Oh, no, this is my third example. I say it the Johannine comma because I want to respect the Germans. But apparently over here, they say the Johannine comma. And Bill brought that to my attention effectively earlier today. He played all these people saying it, and they say Johannine. I just figured it should be, didn't the German discover this? And isn't it Johann? That's what I want to know. Okay. But if you don't know what the Johannine comma is, a classic example and a really important example of something being added to the text of the New Testament long after the book itself was written. And this is the book of 1 John, chapter 5, verses 7 through 8. It's also important because this is an example of an addition being made to the Bible text in order to support a specific doctrine. It is blatant, it's flagrant, and it's there to support the idea of the Trinity. And as Bart Ehrman would talk about this, boy, those were the days. Wow, it's like 20 years ago. Walking on the treadmill and watching Bart Ehrman teach his introduction to the New Testament class. But as Bart Ehrman said about the Trinity, there's only one verse, there's only one passage in the entire New Testament that supports the idea of the Trinity. And that was never there originally. And this is what he's talking about. So here we go. And that is the passage in 1 John. For there are three, this is from the LDS version. For there are three that bear record in heaven, by that I mean the Bible, the Father, the Word, and the Holy Ghost, and these three are one, right? And then look at verse 8 there. And there are three that bear witness in earth, the Spirit, and the water, and the blood, and these three agree in one. So you've got two verses side by side. It's verse 7 that seems to be talking about the Trinity, right? Now, this is from my commentaries book. This is the version where it says, and the Spirit is the one that testifies, for the Spirit is the truth. There are three that testify, the Spirit and the water and the blood, and these three agree. Do you see what's missing from that? What's missing from that is basically all of verse 7. It keeps the part about the Spirit and the water and the blood, and these three are one, which it translates as agree. But see what's out of it? The part in verse 7, for there are three that bear record in heaven, the Father, the Word, and the Holy Ghost, and these three are one. There's nothing about that in this version that's over here in the Oxford, the NSRV, New Revised Standard Version, or NRSV. Yeah. So the reason, now this is the most extreme step you could take to remove Bible words and Bible language, an entire verse from 1 John chapter 5, from the text of the Bible as you're publishing it. So that is an indication of how overwhelmingly the agreement is that this does not belong here. And it is preserved in the footnote instead of having it in the text in a footnote talking about it, right?
Can I just note?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Can I just note, believers come to these kinds of conversations with a certain lens. They know their church is right. They know Joseph Smith is right. So there's this easy ability to sort of discount science sometimes, to discount biblical scholarship at times. And I just want to note, if you have to do that so many times, that in and of itself also points to something, the number of times that you have to do that. And I would only say here, this is the overwhelming scholarship among those who have spent a lifetime studying the scriptures and the history behind them.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say. And that's why it's being addressed here in a Bible. All right, so here's the footnote that talks about that. I think it's also mentioned. No, it isn't mentioned in the commentary, but that's where it talks about that a few other authorities read. See, and then it includes in italics in the footnote the part they actually took out and relegated to a footnote. All right. So, of course, if I'm trying to make a Bible and make it look old, I would take this out too, right? Now, we'll get to the one I gave the build-up for last time. Without a cause. This is an expression. It is a clause. It's a cause clause. It's in the book of Matthew. It's in the Sermon on the Mount. In the New Testament, it's chapter 5. And it's when Jesus is talking to the people about being angry. You know, he that is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of hellfire. That's the without a cause it's talking about here. So without a cause in the Sermon on the Mount, here it is in my my Bible. A Bible. I do have a Bible. And this is it. This is my Bible. So there it is on Matthew 5, it's verse 22. There it is. But I say unto you that whosoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. Right? You don't have to worry about anything else. It's that without a cause that's important. Because if you look at that, that's the way it is. That's the King James Version. And it has included that, as far as I know, ever since it came off the press, without a cause. And yet, here is Matthew. This is, once again, this is from my New Oxford Annotated Bible, the red one that I've been showing you and going from. And down here, that's the portion in yellow on the left, and then you can see there's some footnotes circled on the right. And here's what those look like closer up. Thank you, Bill, for that. You have heard that it was said, notice if you see anything missing. You have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, you shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment. But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment.
Where was
Wait
the
a
without
second.
cause? It was missing.
They did something more than just add or sister, didn't they?
Yeah.
They took out without a cause. Now, this is in the New Revised Standard Version. And there is a footnote. If you go over there, the footnote's on the right. It says, some ancient, I think it's some, might be many. I have it here in front of me, but basically it talks about ancient authorities. That's the older manuscripts, the best manuscripts. Ancient authorities add without cause. Oh, no, or is it later? Some ancient authorities add without cause. That's what they're saying. But the evidence is so great that it was added to what was there originally. They actually took it out of the text. This is another one of those, like the one we just talked about, where the evidence is so strong that they actually take it out of the Bible text and put it in a footnote. So that's without a cause, all right? And that's what it does in the New Revised Standard Version. Now, once again, remember, without a cause is in the New Testament. There's nothing here that would really signal that there's anything wrong with it, except for this. Watch this footnote. See B there as a footnote without a cause? Coincidentally enough, can you read that footnote? Can you see that footnote? It's B.
Yeah, by the way, can you answer me where is this page from?
This is my Bible.
Okay.
LDS
Right.
Bible.
I didn't know if we had switched over to the Book of Mormon or something else. Okay. So E,
excuse me.
Joseph Smith translation, Matthew
For
5:22.
the binding on my.
Oh, because this is why I said that. And 3rd Nephi 12:22, where, by the way, Matthew has no business being. And so Matthew 5:22 and 3rd Nephi 12:22, the Joseph Smith translation of Matthew. So Joseph Smith's fixing Matthew 5:22 and then using Matthew in the Book of Mormon omits the words without a cause.
Yes. So Joseph Smith translation in Matthew 5:22, without a cause is dropped. In other words, it is as if in the Joseph Smith translation, he was really actually inspired because he took something out of the text that had been added at a later date and wasn't in the original text. So Matthew 5:22 of the Joseph Smith translation omits it, just like my Oxford Annotated Bible did, the one I just read to you. And also, where Matthew shows up, just the Sermon on the Mount, in 3rd Nephi, chapter 12, verse 22, when it comes to the same passage, it also omits the words without a cause.
This looks incredible if there's no evidence that Joseph Smith had access to anything of the day that could inform him to do such a thing. If he had access to something that could inform him to do such a thing, that instantly becomes the more rational answer, is that he used it.
I was, as you know, an apologist for 10 years, particularly in the 1980s, and I was over the moon about this. This was incredible. This was a sure thing. How could Joseph Smith have known to take out without a cause in the Book of Mormon? Here, the Book of Mormon is actually quoting correctly from an earlier manuscript before it became corrupted, as opposed to those other examples where he showed that it quoted from them after they became corrupted, like the long ending of Mark, right? This one goes in the Book of Mormon's favor. So absolutely over the moon about that. And it was an incredible evidence. The problem is that, and I think this next slide, oh no, here's 3rd Nephi 12, just to follow it up and show you that that clause of without a cause is not there either. But I say unto you that whosoever is angry with his brother shall be in danger of his judgment, and whosoever shall say to his brother, Raka, shall be in danger of the judgment. So you see, there's no without a cause after brother. Just isn't there. Got dropped. So it appears that Joseph Smith knew by some means that that clause was a late addition and should not be reflected in the original manuscripts. Either that or maybe just a wild coincidence. I don't know. But I think that it appears that he knew it was not supposed to be there. These verses may have been modified in order to take them out, both in the Book of Mormon as well as in the JST of Matthew. And the question then that is left is did Joseph Smith get this information from revelation, whether he received, that's why it was being revealed to him or not? Was it from revelation from God? Or was he going to a commentary? Were there any commentaries around that had this information in it that he could have appealed to make a book look ancient and the Bible quoted in it look original, just as I was talking about in my hypothetical that I could do using my new Oxford Annotated Bible? So the answer is yes, yes, and oh yeah. It was long thought by apologists, including yours truly, that changes to the KJV, King James Version text, that Joseph Smith produced in either the Book of Mormon or the JST, the Joseph Smith translation, were evidence of inspiration and revelation. It was long thought by apologists that those changes were evidence of inspiration and revelation, and great amounts of energy, time, and effort were expended in trying to find connections between these changes in the KJV and earlier or alternate manuscripts of those books. And the best that they came up with ended up being something that was incredible evidence in the 80s, but now it's evidence of plagiarism, basically, in 2025, because we are going to find out that, number two, unfortunately, what has been discovered is that these changes in the earlier Bible manuscripts were available to Joseph Smith through Bible commentaries of his day, such as the Adam Clarke Bible commentary.
Yeah, to the point where the faithful scholars at BYU couldn't avoid confronting it.
Well,
Meaning
they
Thomas
could
Wayne.
have. No, they could have avoided it. And I also want to point out, because I heard that interview that you had with Haley Lamont Wilson, and I remember it well. And it was either there or someone else's interview where she was talking, but she didn't do a lot. Was She was talking to you about her concerns about publishing it. And I know we already talked about that. You, by the way, she trusted you an awful lot. That's remarkable to me still, that she was willing to trust you with holding back on publishing that interview until after she had. How long was that you had to hold off on it?
It was, I'm going to guess, maybe about 2 months or so.
Okay. Well, the reason I brought her up is only because my understanding of the story is actually she's the one who discovered it. And she's the student, right? And he's the professor, but she discovered it. I
Yeah,
think she
yeah.
said she was actually even in a Relief Society class or something, and she just decided on a lark to do some kind of computerized search comparing passages from Adam Clarke Bible commentary with a certain Joseph Smith translation. And it was like, you're not going to find that everywhere. So all of a sudden, it was like the apple fell out of the tree and hit Newton on the head, and it connected, and she went bing, and then she was off to the races.
Yeah, my only point was that the evidence was so strong to Thomas Wayman and so interesting too, that they pressed forward with it at the very place that would want to run furthest from it.
Yes. And I have no idea how that ended up. I think that the two things that may play into it are that this was the result of a federal grant, at least partially funded by a federal grant, which came with strings attached, one of which being that you had to actually publish the research and prove that you did the work that you were getting the federal money for as a grant, right? So, oops. So that came up. That was ORCA. Remember, I can't remember what it stands for, some acronym. ORCA, and that was the federal grant, and that was when the synopsis was published on the ORCA website. You remember all this. Oh, this was incredible. Incredible times. And so they had to do that much. And then, well, the main thing I want to do, make sure it's clear, is that, yeah, it was Haley. Haley's the one who discovered this, apparently, in the JST. Okay, so now let's go on now. See, this is an older paper. I'm pretty sure this predates the other. And I was trying to look it up here really quickly, and I couldn't. If somebody wants to in the live chat or comments, this is Ron Huggins, who wrote a paper, a very important paper called Without a Cause and Ships of Tarshish. That's another problematic phrase in the Bible and in the Book of Mormon that we're not going to go into here. I'm trying to streamline this as much as possible, believe it or not. But it does go into the thing about without a cause, right? Which is the passage that we are interested in. This is in dialogue, if I didn't say that. Pretty sure. So here it is, without a cause, Matthew 5:22. Perhaps even more familiar than the ships of Tarshish parallel is the removal of the phrase without a cause in the Book of Mormon version of the Sermon on the Mount, which John W. Welch refers to as the Sermon at the Temple, and in the Joseph Smith translation, Sermon on the Mount. See, remember, he removed it from both. Again, we begin with the remarks of Terrell Givens. Now, this is from Terrell Givens' book, By the Hand of Mormon, which was about the Book of Mormon. It came out 15, 20 years ago, whatever it was. And he's quoting from him here because what's going to happen is that Terrell Givens, as I understand this, tell me if I'm wrong, is that Terrell Givens is going to use this without a cause removal, right, as evidence that the Book of Mormon is true, that there's revelation involved. How did Joseph Smith know? How could they possibly have known? I know it's kind of silly because Matthew shouldn't be there in the first place. So what do you really achieve by making something huge that shouldn't be there in the first place and a little bit of it more realistic? I don't know. But regardless, when you're an apologist, it's important not to think that far ahead. Here is the quote from Terrell Givens. This is not to say there are no variations that, on the other hand, suggest an ancient origin for the temple sermon. John Welch considers the counterpart in Matthew 5:22 deserving of recognition. Matthew's Jesus warns that whosoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. That's Matthew. Third Nephi's Jesus omits the qualification without a cause. So, Welch points out, do many of the early better manuscripts. Back to Terrell. Back to this paper, Huggins. Given the abundance of early manuscripts found since 1830, Givens concludes, quote, this high degree of confirmation of the received Greek texts speaks generally in favor of the Book of Mormon's sermon at the temple. For one could not have gambled wisely on such confirmation a century and a half ago, before the earliest Greek New Testament manuscripts had been discovered. You see how Terrell Givens is portraying this as evidence for the Book of Mormon's authenticity.
It's a bullseye. Joseph Smith nailed it. He omits the piece that we will find out later biblical scholarship shows should have been omitted.
And here's the thing that Terrell Givens, after having presented it as evidence, after going to a footnote, after continuing, here it is at the very end of the moderately lengthy footnote or endnote, Givens states and admits the real state of the situation. As Stan Larson, and this is Stan Larson who needs to get some credit for this, which is even earlier than this paper. As Stan Larson points out, the omission had also been suggested in Adam Clarke's 1810 commentary, as well as other sources, which might have been known to Joseph through other avenues.
And once you know that,
Yeah.
then this thing being touted as an evidence is suddenly mediocre at best. It's
When
a
you
hit.
see that,
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. It's astonishing. And I know that Huggins is writing this in a very nice and scholarly way, but I will give it a little drama if that's okay. My God, what does Terrell Givens think he's doing? He is presenting this in the body of his book as an evidence for the Book of Mormon and its authenticity, because without a cause, it's not there in Third freaking Nephi. Then he has a footnote. It's moderately lengthy. And at the very end of that footnote, he admits that it's not an evidence at all.
This is like the Book of Abraham Gospel Topic Essay, which points to the Book of Josephus and what's the other one?
Jasher.
Yeah, and that they weren't, that Joseph couldn't have possibly have known about these things. And then in footnote number 43 or whatever it is, it says actually Joseph might have had the Book of Jasher and Josephus.
It's the exact same game that they're playing. And which is to say that these stories about Abraham appear in extra biblical books that Joseph Smith did not have access to. How could he have known? The thing they don't tell you, the thing they will never tell you, is that these stories also appeared in ancient manuscripts to which Joseph Smith did have access. And so in the footnote, after saying, how did he know, in the body of the paper, or implying it strongly, in the footnote, they retreat to the Mott. Yeah, they retreat to the Mott and say, by the way, Joseph Smith did have these accounts in like the Book of Jasher and in Josephus, but we don't know that he read them.
Also, just this comment. So he's saying, what's the chance Givens knew this ahead of time and then still have the audacity to paint it as a hit?
Oh, we know it because it's in his footnote. That's his footnote, Troy.
Yeah, it's in the same book. So he makes the statement in the body of the text that it's an evidence, and then at the end of the footnote at the bottom admits that maybe it's not an evidence.
And that's the significance, though, of the difference. It's not a footnote. It's an end note. So he puts this either at the end of the chapter or at the end of the entire book. So it's completely separated from it. You actually have to dig it up and not just look down at the bottom of the page.
Either way, one part is made to be read by every reader, and the other part is tucked away, a little more difficult to find.
Okay, so there's the without a cause controversy. And I wanted to come back to this footnote. The footnote saying that Matthew 5:22 and 3 Nephi 12:22 omit the words without a cause, because then we wonder, how did Joseph Smith come up with it? Well, enter stage left, the Adam Clarke Bible commentary.
Can I note, RFM, just a couple little data points here. Adam Clarke, this was a Methodist Bible commentary. Correct?
Oh, yeah, he was a Methodist.
He is
Methodist Episcopalian. I think it was heavy on the Methodist.
This would have a slight Methodist bent to it.
Oh, definitely.
If I remember right, I'm going to see if I remember. Let's see. During this time of great excitement, my mind was called up to serious reflection and great uneasiness. And though my feelings were deep and often poignant, still I kept myself aloof from the various parties. In process of time, my mind became somewhat partial. Oh, that's right. To the Methodist sect, and I felt some desire to be united with
You're
them.
right. I thought it was a
Joseph,
Scientologist.
Joseph Smith admits on the front end of his history that he had a special love and affection for Methodism.
We know he became an exhorter in the Methodist Church, which is like a
Yeah.
junior preacher.
He almost joined it. Based on our best historical analysis of that time of his life, he came uber close to joining the Methodist Church.
Yes. By the way, when I say like a junior preacher, I'm not positive that that's true. That's my sense. So I'll just say that's my understanding. Want to make that clear in case I'm wrong, because sometimes, I just say things, but I want to make sure that I make the distinction between what I'm sure of and what I'm guessing at. It's an exhorter. He's exhorting, right? So, junior preacher. Let's go on. Now here, this one is, that's new. That's what it looks like new. It's 6 volumes in the United States. It was 8 volumes in the England when it was originally published, but 6 volumes here. And I believe that the way it's divided up is that the first 3 volumes relate to the Old Testament. The second set of 3 volumes, the last 3 volumes relate to the New Testament. And this is what they used to look like. This is 1817. Now you notice that some of them are 1810, 1817. This thing was hot. This was a huge bestseller. They're pumping them out like every few years in new editions back then. And this was the place to go to find out about the Bible and what the heck what it means. And this was a subject of huge interest at the time. And it's a second great awakening where Joseph Smith is. Yeah, my take on this is that these are kind of like what Mormon doctrine was back in the 1970s, that you pretty much have one of these in every Mormon household. I don't know that you had one of these in every Methodist household because it'd probably be a little bit pricey, but you could probably lay your hands on one. In fact, we got a story from early church history which talks about the Adam Clarke Bible commentary, which we'll get to in just a few minutes. Now, notice this. This is the opening page here of the Adam Clarke Bible commentary. And if you look over here on the right, it says authorized translation. That's the first thing to notice. The text of the Bible is in it. So when you look at those 6 volumes, that's not solid commentary. You're going to have the Bible in that as well as commentary. So you've got the authorized translation. Authorized means the KJV. With all the parallel texts and marginal readings, to which are added notes and practical observations designed as a help to a correct understanding of the sacred writings. Man, this is like one-stop shopping. So in this, we find, here's the 1813 Adam Clarke commentary. So this is the Gospel of Luke, right? And you'll see that there's text on the top. It's kind of similar to my red Bible. But you'll notice at the bottom of the left page, it's the same on the right, that there is a small rectangle. Those are what I would call the cross references, or they're not endnotes. They're endnotes are at the end. These are footnotes. These are footnotes. And then you can see, though, that underneath that, just like in my red Bible, there's a lot more there that's commentary. So you can see how much on these 2 pages is the text of the Bible, the footnotes, and then underneath that, the commentary. That's an example of one. Here's the second book of Samuel. And you'll notice that on the second book of Samuel, we have the same thing. If you look on the right, you can see the text from the Bible. Then you can see the footnotes and then the commentary underneath it. And over here on the left, the second book of Samuel, you'll notice there's some writing there. And then underneath that, it says chapter 1. And underneath that, chapter 1, and before it starts with the actual text of the second book of Samuel, there's a paragraph in italics, which ends up being an introduction, sort of an overview of the book. So that if you read through that, you'll kind of know what the book is going to be about and the highlights, the main parts of the book. And Bill and I were looking at this earlier today, and one of us said, that kind of looks similar to something else I've seen before. Do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I can take this, but I want to clarify a question with you. So one of the critical things about the Book of Mormon translation that's said is that Joseph Smith copied over into the Book of Mormon errors from the Bible that we knew the Smith family to own. I don't remember what year it is, 1737 King James Version.
Well, they're all the same.
Yeah, but
They're the same version.
Yeah, I don't know that. My understanding is that the scholarship is good enough to know the exact version of the Bible, which year, the what edition of the King James Bible was held by the Smith family, in which errors were transcribed over into the Book of Mormon. And by the way, it's one of these things that we note when people say there was no one in the room. The Book of Mormon witnesses say Joseph Smith did not use any text. And
well, the one who spoke to that issue said that, yes, and nobody else independently mentioned it or affirmatively offered it.
Yeah, and just to note, it seems like it would be required to have a text with you to copy exact errors over from a Bible into, unless
the Bible itself. I mean, my gosh, I don't know why we're focusing on the errors. I know that goes to a certain argument, but just to have the Bible itself show up word for word.
Yeah,
that's crazy if you didn't have the Bible.
Yeah, what I want to ask, and we talked about this a little bit before, but I don't remember exactly how the answer went. Do we know if the edition of the Bible, the King James Version, if it would have had the same errors in it,
yes,
that in Clarke's commentary, that we see transcribed over into Joseph Smith's translation? Which is
it's the authorized version.
Yeah, it's interesting, huh?
Pick up the King James Version. They're all the same. This is the authorized version of the time. And it is replicated in Clarke's commentary. As we've seen at the top of every page, it has the authorized version throughout. So he doesn't change the authorized version, as I mentioned before, like with my red Bible, if I can just keep my Oxford annotated, right? It's an extreme step to actually take words out of Holy Writ. He doesn't do that. He'll make comments about what he thinks it should have been or would have been or might have been originally. I don't know, like, without a cause. Yeah, he mentions that in Matthew.
Yeah,
absolutely. And so does Joseph Smith get it from Matthew? Or, excuse me, does he get it from Matthew in Adam Clarke's Bible commentary? Or did he get it from Revelation? And is that why it's taken out in both the Book of Mormon Matthew and in the Joseph Smith translation Matthew?
And that gets more complicated when you add to it that one text was in Hebrew, translated into Greek, translated into English, and the other is in Reformed Egyptian, translated by spiritual revelation into English. I'll just note that.
There's a great deal of debate. I tend to think that the New Testament probably, at least the gospel, probably was originally written in Greek.
Sweet. Still two different languages as the starting point. So what we saw here, so again, that was just a side note to sort of clarify something. Just to note here on the screen, it struck me when I was looking at the second book of Samuel here on the right.
Yeah.
And noticing that the way in which the synopsis of the chapter looked, it reminded me of what that we should go look in the Book of Mormon and see if we see the same thing there. And so this is the 1830 edition of the Book of Mormon.
Yes.
Book of Alma. By the way, you and I talked about this. It's not in Mosiah. But if we understand Mosiah priority and that Mosiah was actually begun as part of the 116 pages that were lost, and it was the last few pages that somehow were hung on to, that's being a different thing done in a separate point in time. It doesn't have it. But every other book in the Book of Mormon has a synopsis to start the book off. And notice the indentation is the same, but it in italics is the same. Joseph Smith is using in the Book of Mormon, when he sends it to the print press, when they decide how they want this to look, it is, maybe it's a coincidence, maybe this is a printing standard, who knows? But what I do notice is that the way in which a synopsis is put in by Adam Clarke and by who Joseph Smith or God, if he's directing it, seems to follow the exact pattern of Adam Clarke.
Right. And two somewhat small differences, but they're important to note. The first is that in case it's not clear to everybody, these italicized book headings in the Book of Mormon were said by Joseph Smith to have been part of the gold plates. It is part of the Book of Mormon text. The italicized chapter headings in the Book of Mormon were not part of the original text. They were added later by Bruce R. McConkie, I think, and then that we still have those in the book. That's not original to the Book of Mormon, but the italicized book headings are. All right. So,
Yeah, so
that is part of the Book of Mormon, according to Joseph Smith.
Yeah,
Now,
I'm not
over here.
RFM, I'm not noting so much that there is a synopsis. So there's two different things happening here. One is the style in which that synopsis is placed in the book, and the other is the synopsis itself. So Vogel's adding the same thing you just said. The superscriptions in front of books and some chapters are supposedly from the plates. So you get to the very beginning of the Book of Alma, and at the very beginning of the first chapter, it always tells you in Alma and in every other book except for Mosiah what this book is basically going to contain as a basic narrative. Joseph Smith and others tell us that that was there in the plates, that this is part of the ancient inscription. That also replicates the style of Clarke, but I'm noting that the way in which the indentation, so on the left in the Book of Alma, it says the account of Alma, and that is shifted over to the left, and everything below it is indented to the right.
Right. It's whatever the opposite is of an indent is, that first
Yes.
line is.
Yep. And in Adam Clarke's commentary, the exact same style is followed in a way that, again, I'm not an expert in these things. I just noticed it.
So two things that I wanted to mention again. First off was what I said before. Second is that a difference is that in the Book of Mormon, it is a book heading. In the Adam Clarke Bible commentary, it is a chapter heading specifically. Okay. They have these at the beginning of each chapter. See, that only applies to chapter 1 in the second book of Samuel. So that is a difference. The other thing I will note, although it's probably meaningless, is that interestingly, Adam Clarke also is very interested in systems of time and measurements of time. And at the beginning, even above that italicized chapter summary, it says year from the creation, 2949. Year before the incarnation, 1055. Year before the first Olympiad, 279. Year before the building of Rome, 302. Do you know any other book that has competing and ongoing different calendar systems, Bill?
Yeah, but before I answer that with the answer everybody in the room wants to scream at the monitor, notice in chapter 1 where it begins, now it came to pass after the death of Saul. Notice to the left of that, it's doing the same thing. It's noting the various times. So the Book of Mormon has these multiple dating systems. And at the very least, we should recognize that Clarke is sort of utilizing the same kind of concept within his work.
Good point. Yeah, you're right. He's taking those and abbreviating them from the top, putting them in the margins, and I guess he'll shift them and change them as time goes on, kind of like at the bottom right of the Book of Mormon on the right-hand pages and the bottom left of the Book of Mormon on the left-hand pages, which I think were done by Orson Pratt at some later point. All right, so let's
just Dan Vogel's just noting that would have been a publisher's decision. I don't know which part of what we talked about, Dan, you're speaking to, but
the indent.
Gotcha. RFM and I did talk about that before the show. That's why I use the language that I'm just noticing it. And we should be clear that I'm open to someone saying that's the way that the Grandin print press and whoever printed the Bible, they all would have used the same sort of style for sure.
Yeah. It may be a similarity without meaning. But there it is at 2. On the first book of Nephi, chapter 1, I added this one after we talked for 2 hours this morning, Bill, about this. And that was "and," the same word. Just makes the point a little more clear. And this is Exodus. This is also a Bible commentary from Adam Clarke. And once again, you can see that on some of these pages, like the one on the right, the text from the Bible is just about a quarter of the entire page. And everything else is a little bit of footnotes and then all the commentary going on. And that introduces and brings us up to date and a very important paper published by Colby Townsend, March 14th, 2025, titled Early 19th Century Biblical Scholarship and the Production of the Book of Mormon. Now, do you have anything you want to say before we launch into this? Now, this is the second half of this evening's presentation, folks. Nothing?
The only, I don't know what you're trying to get at. But the only thing I would want to say here is if you're not going to mention it, I don't know if you're going to mention it or not, but that there's some family history with Smith that indicates that he would have had access to Clarke's commentary. See, one of the things we do in this space is we say we're making the argument that Joseph Smith relied in a statistically significant way upon Adam Clarke's commentary. And the believer might go, well, yeah, but first prove that he had it. And so I want, maybe if you wouldn't mind, to sort of start there.
Oh, absolutely. I'm going to go through this. Now, I'm certainly not going to read the whole paper. I've taken some parts that I think are important and significant to making certain points. I do want to state at the outset, overall, that Colby Townsend, he's not writing a paper about the Book of Mormon. The part that we're focusing on is in his paper, but he's not using the presence of Adam Clarke Bible commentary in the Book of Mormon Isaiah chapters in order to prove anything about Joseph Smith or in order to prove anything about Mormonism. Well, that's actually not completely true, because what he wants to prove is simply this. There has been an idea that is pervaded, is that the higher criticism, which had been, I believe, created and invented and developed largely in Germany back to the 1700s, is now percolating and becoming more and more accepted, but it's accepted in the higher and more educated classes. Okay. So that's something that has been pervasive. And he's writing this paper to prove or to demonstrate his argument that no, it was not restricted to the higher educated classes. Even uneducated, relatively uneducated, certainly unpost-educated people and farmers like Joseph Smith knew about this stuff and used it. And so this is the point he's making through the evidence he's presenting in his paper, which ends up getting it published where it gets published. Because believe it or not, it's not universally interesting to absolutely everybody, showing how it is that Joseph Smith created the Book of Mormon or the sources that he drew on. But that's the point. That's the overall point he's making. But the entire paper and the proof itself goes right to the issue that is of most interest to most people in this audience, which is, okay, yeah, this is one of the main things that Joseph Smith did in coming up with the Isaiah chapters in the Book of Mormon. It doesn't look so much like God as simply going to a commentary and, copying down a few good ideas. So, from Colby's paper, hopefully now, with that huge introduction, this is going to make a lot of sense. It is undisputed that early Mormonism would come to be directly affected by this shock wave, since the project, both to fill in the Bible's missing gaps and to correct and perfect the biblical text, would become a major aspect of Smith's life's work, as he produced new religious texts from roughly 1828, 116 pages, till his death in 1844. Besides dictating a long Bible-like narrative in the Book of Mormon, Smith revised the Old and New Testaments between 1830 and 1833, JST, similar to how Gujar has shown, I wasn't aware of this, by the way, Gujar has shown several other early Americans tried to correct and revise the Bible. This is the environment. This is the milieu that Joseph Smith is swimming in. It's not all fundamentalists about the Bible. There is a huge pool of people trying to get back to the original Bible and trying to correct and revise the Bible, realizing that errors have crept in, and then seeking to revise it and get it back to the original, its purity and its power. Joseph Smith is doing what many others are doing in his day. Recently, some scholars have argued that Smith also used Clarke's commentary in his revision of the Bible after he completed his work on the Book of Mormon. That's Haley Lamont and, I'm sorry, the professor, Thomas Wayman.
Thomas Wayman, yep.
That you were talking about. Smith, also produced other texts that rewrote the Bible during his short career, like the Book of Abraham, as well as individual revelations. This is all very familiar to us as Mormons. The Book of Mormon is a volume that both extends the Bible in numerous ways by filling in some of its gaps, such as explaining some of whom the lost sheep of Matthew 10:6 might have been. You ever think about that? That's a gloss on the text. That's explaining a gap in the Bible text. Because Matthew 10:6 says, sheep, lost sheep I have that are not of this fold, they also must hear my voice and follow me and all that stuff. But it never says who it is. But when Jesus comes to the Nephites, he quotes this and he tells them who it is. It's you. You guys, you're the lost sheep.
Again, Matthew shouldn't be in the Book of Mormon, but the Book of Mormon knows there's a gap in Matthew and it fills in the gap so that the reader of the Book of Mormon can now know what Matthew meant.
Yeah, and in a very meaningful way, I think that the Book of Mormon can be viewed, not entirely, but in a substantial measure as Joseph Smith's first attempts, actually not even his first attempts, at the inspired revision of the Bible, his inspired version of the Bible. That's what the Book of Mormon is, over and over. In Isaiah, in Matthew, here in Matthew 10:6. And I only go, well, maybe it's not, because, of course, he was also doing the same thing with that early revelation in the Doctrine and Covenants about the ending of John and what does it mean, and saying that he sees a scrap of parchment buried up somewhere, presumably in the Holy Land, and he can not only see it from where he is in New York, he can read it and he can interpret it, and it gets its own revelation, where he's correcting a much disputed passage at the end of John as to whether John is going to live to see Jesus come again, because it's ambiguous the way it's stated. And fortunately, this particular scrap of manuscript or papyrus that he can see and translate gives the answer to that. Of all the manuscripts in the world that he could remote view and translate, it had to be that one. Lucky Joe. So the Book of Mormon is a volume. The Book of Mormon attempts to offer a revised version of much of the book of Isaiah as one sample of what was thought to be lost through the Catholic corruption of Scripture. Now, let's go back to what the Book of Mormon really means when it talks about the great and abominable church and how the Bible would pass through its hands, and that because it was so corrupt, many plain and precious things would be taken from the Bible that would be restored in the last days through other books that the Lord would bring forth. That's why this is called the Great and Abominable Abridgment. Okay.
I just want to note here for the person watching this episode.
Oh, it's a great and abominable plagiarism. I'm sorry, Bill. I got the name of the show wrong.
That's okay. I want the believer or anybody viewing just to take a step back for a minute, take a pause. What would it mean if we could notice in the Book of Mormon that the authors of the Book of Mormon, ancient or modern, are coming to the project already telling you on the front half that they're going to fix what was wrong with the Bible. And then also,
right,
Joseph Smith is utilizing Adam Clarke's commentary in doing that very project. It would, at least for me, it would force me to wonder who the voice was of the people who are claiming that the project is to fix the Bible or to show you what was wrong with it. It would seem like those would be one and the same. It's kind of hard to sort of separate those two concepts. That Book of Mormon authors want to fix the Bible. The Book of Mormon is a way to do that. The project's already laid out in the beginning with that being the theme. And separate from that, Joseph just so happens to bring Adam Clarke's commentary into the project, which does that very thing.
Yes. That is one of the many things that happens. And that's why I wanted to show you examples of it in my Red Bible, which is a modern version, of course, but to show you those kinds of things. Certainly not everything that's in the commentary has to do with manuscript history. A lot of it has to do with history. A lot has to do with all sorts of things. But you do run into those things. And believe it or not, as a member of this church that has an affection for missing scripture and missing books of scripture, those stand out to me above anything else. If something's missing or was different in an earlier manuscript, that is attractive to me. And I think it may have been to Joseph Smith as well, given the project he had set himself of restoring the original version of all these chapters of Isaiah in his Book of Mormon. All right, because it had to exist that way, at least as of 600 BC, right? Or BCE. Going on with paper by Colby Townsend, it is my argument, he says, that Smith was highly attuned to discussions surrounding the complex textual history of the Bible. It's the Second Great Awakening. This is what everybody is talking about. Just as other early 19th century American Protestants were. Though from a rural and less fortunate background, he was a capable and creative thinker, not unlike other undereducated 19th century authors like Walt Whitman and Herman Melville. He turned to the print culture of his day, Joseph did, in order to mediate between knowledge gleaned from biblical studies and the text of Isaiah as it is found in the King James Version to produce what he believed to be a more correct form of the text. Sounds like what we've been talking about, huh? I prepared you so much for this that hopefully it'll be just like, oh, this is so obvious now. Yes, I understand. It is well known that Smith was first attracted through his wife Emma's family to Methodism before organizing his own religious institution in 1830, his church. And it is likely to the print culture of Methodism, i.e. books and pamphlets of the 1820s, that Smith turned in order to correct the text of Isaiah in the block quotations in the Book of Mormon. Now we get to the story that you had hinted at before. Bill, did you want to say anything at this point?
I'll obviously say this at the end as well, but I at least want to sort of notify the audience. We're not going to go into all of the points that Colby makes, and there are several of them. There are interesting partitions of kinds of changes that Joseph Smith utilizes Adam Clarke to do in the Book of Mormon. Some of them follow a rule of sort of merging the Bible and Clarke's ideas about the Bible. Some of them ignore the Bible and go with Clarke. Some of the things ignore Clarke and go with the Bible. And there are other things happening too. There are moments where, and again, we won't cover some of this. I guess in one point, what I'm saying is there's a cost to Colby's paper, but go buy Colby's paper and read it and understand it, because it is groundbreaking for the ramifications for Mormonism. The second point I make is that when you take the 20,000 foot view and you see how intimate Joseph was with Adam Clarke's commentary, you begin to sense that Joseph Smith comes to the translation part of the project, and he's already intimately familiar with Adam Clarke and what Adam Clarke's trying to accomplish and what Joseph wants to accomplish in the Book of Mormon. That for me, at least, I had no option but to see Joseph Smith as a premeditated. He had already had the plan in his head when he comes to the translation. Now, folks can differ with me on that if they want to, but I'm suggesting that what seems to me to be the most reasonable view is that Joseph Smith spent a lot of time getting familiar with Adam Clarke's commentary, or he brought it into the room and used it when we were all told nothing was used. Either of those are deeply problematic for a faithful narrative of the Book of Mormon. I'll also just note, remember, Joseph Smith in 1822 is visited by Moroni. He tells the public.
1823, did you say?
Is that the first visit, 1823?
That's what he said it was, I think.
Okay, 1823. is the first visit of Moroni, and Moroni says, come back in a year. And Joseph tells everybody, I got to come back in a year, because Joseph thinks whatever is going on, he'll have the project ready in a year. Then he kicks the can down the street again. Another year, another year, another year, another year, over and over and over again.
Moroni has to teach him all this really important, super secret stuff.
If you start with the premise that Joseph, there is no ancient author, and Joseph is simply implementing a collection of ideas into a book to tell the world his version of what good religion would be, that time period, kicking the can down the street every year, certainly seems like plenty.
Which sounds remarkably like Methodism mixed with the what was that culture that they had, the mound builder myth? So it's Methodism and the mound builder myth equals the Book of Mormon.
Joseph would have had plenty of time to get intimate with Adam Clarke's work. Okay, now let me get this off the screen. I'll let you tell this story.
Okay.
I just wanted it to be told to ensure that people had some basis in which to say, yeah, Smith had Clarke's commentary.
So here we go. This is told a bit densely. I'll lay it out here. Smith's uncle-in-law, Nathaniel Lewis. Okay, Nathaniel Lewis, he's a prominent Methodist preacher in Harmony, Pennsylvania. Now remember, Joseph Smith is down there. That's where Emma's from. That's where Emma's parents live. That's where Emma's dad's, I think, his brother-in-law, technically. This uncle, Nathaniel Lewis, he's there. He's a prominent Methodist preacher. So this account comes not directly from Nathaniel Lewis, but from another Methodist preacher named George Peck, who says he was told this by Nathaniel Lewis. All right, so that's the provenance of the story. Smith's uncle-in-law, Nathaniel Lewis, was a prominent Methodist preacher in Harmony, Pennsylvania from the 1790s until the family moved to Illinois in the 1840s and 50s. So during this time period, around 10 years after Joseph Smith had worked on and then published the Book of Mormon, so it's around 1840, Nathaniel Lewis, the uncle, told George Peck, another Methodist preacher in the region, about an encounter he had with Joseph Smith when the story came out about the gold plates and the great spectacles. So here's the story. Joseph Smith moved with his wife Emma to her family's home in Harmony in December 1827. And he worked in Harmony on an early lost manuscript, the 116 pages of the Book of Mormon, in the spring of 1828. Then began intermittently working again the next winter until the arrival in the spring of 1829 of a new amanuensis, Oliver Cowdery, who worked for Smith through the majority of the final manuscript. Doesn't Colby have a great way with words? Just summarizing so succinctly and beautifully all this church history into just a brief space. I think it's great. Smith and Cowdery moved to Fayette, New York in May 1829 to complete the manuscript. So presumably this encounter occurred sometime between December 1827 and May 1829, though likely after the initial reports about the story, as Lewis calls it, in newspapers in 1828. That sentence, I imagine there was some debate that Colby had with whether that should be in a footnote. But he is trying to time when this would have happened. So he's being very detail-oriented, which is all to the good. Going on, according to Nathaniel Peck, the uncle's recounting, no, not the uncle, I'm sorry, his friend, recounting what Lewis, the uncle, had told him about 3 years since, Lewis asked Smith if the spectacles Smith claimed to have found with the plates, and they were the main tool that Smith said he used to translate the record. So his uncle, Lewis, asked Smith, Emma's uncle, would work only for him or if they would work for anyone that used them. Have you ever thought what you would ask a young Joseph Smith or an older Joseph Smith if you had the chance? Well, this is what Nathaniel Lewis asked him.
Yeah, well, the glasses work if I put them on.
Yeah, those golden plates, they work for you or anybody. Or excuse me, those spectacles. Lewis claimed Smith said they would work for anyone. Okay, follow-up question. Lewis responded by saying that if he, Lewis, could use the spectacles to try to read the variety of ancient scripts in Adam Clarke's commentary, that he would then believe the story about the gold plates. Give me the spectacles. If I can use them to read this language that I don't know, I'll believe you. Joseph Smith did not follow through, believe it or not. Clarke's massive commentary on the Bible, sometimes published in 8 volumes, mostly in the UK, and other times in 6 volumes, usually in the US, was notorious. This is kind of important. Was notorious for its overabundance of text critical and historical information in its notes. You can see how big they were. It's an overabundance of information. Clarke was himself a Methodist. This is why it's big among the Methodists, but not exclusively so. Born in Ireland in 1762 and ordained to the ministry in 1782. Moving beyond just ministerial training, Clarke became a Bible scholar through his study at Kingswood School and then at the University of Aberdeen, where he received an MA in 1807. He knew and studied a startlingly long list of languages, including Hebrew, Greek, Latin, Syriac, Arabic, Persian, Sanskrit, and others. This source would have been fruitful. By the way, if you actually look at an Adam Clarke Bible commentary, you'll find on the pages in the commentary section, time after time, he will reproduce the scripts of ancient languages and then give the translations for them as they have to do with anything that's going on in the text that he's talking about. So he puts samples from many of these different languages into his commentary in order to interpret them. So this source would have been fruitful ground for Lewis and Smith, Nathaniel Lewis and Joseph Smith, to engage Joseph Smith's claims together, because they have all these languages, right, in the commentary. Since almost every page of the commentary has multiple scripts in the notes. But apparently, the conversation ended there. According to Peck, Joseph Smith never undertook to convert Uncle Lewis afterward. So that's the end of that story. But it talks to us about the Adam Clarke Bible commentary. And also what you can find out by looking at a Bible commentary by Adam Clarke is all those scripts in foreign languages. The reason that's interesting is because in the Pearl of Great Price, the Joseph Smith history, as part of verse 64, where Martin Harris is talking about going to New York to talk to Professor Charles Anthon. Is that the same one?
Yeah.
Oh,
Let me
okay.
make this bigger. And that should be helpful to you to show that. I can make it even bigger yet.
Yes, as we try and piece the story and figure out what he's talking about, it appears that there's 2 different transcripts that he takes. One is of characters with a translation, which according to this account, Martin Harris says Charles Anthon said was number 1. It's the best translation I've ever seen from the Reformed Egyptian. And then there's a separate text, whether it's on a separate piece of paper, not sure, of characters without a translation, which is what Martin Harris now starts talking about. He says, this is in the faithful history. I then showed him, can you read this, Bill?
I then showed him those which were not yet translated. And he said they were Egyptian, Chaldaic, Assyriac, and Arabic. And he said they were true characters. He gave me a certificate.
And that's all you need to have. Then it's a certificate.
Yeah, certified.
In the faithful account, right? Charles Anthon, the expert, is identifying the characters that Martin Harris has brought to him that Joseph Smith has transcribed from the Book of Mormon plates, which are supposed to be Reformed Egyptian. At least that's what I heard.
Yeah.
Takes them to Professor Anthon, and now Professor Anthon says, yeah, those are correct characters, and they're of Egyptian, Chaldaic, Assyriac, and Arabic. And
What did Adam Clarke use in his commentary?
Yeah. Now that's the same thing in a different format that I had in a slide before you pulled it up. So it's the one before this.
I got you.
There it is. He knew and studied a startlingly long list of languages, including Hebrew, Greek, Latin, Syriac, Arabic, Persian, Sanskrit, and others.
And in his commentary is some of these languages.
Yeah.
In other words, Joseph could have copied characters over from Adam Clarke's commentary onto a piece of paper, sent them to Charles Anthon, which isn't Reformed Egyptian at all. In fact, the fact that Anthon says that these are these other languages and that's legit should already raise red flags for any Mormon, because the Book of Mormon is supposed to be in Reformed Egyptian only. And yet the Anthon piece of paper has much more in common with Clarke's commentary than it does Reformed Egyptian.
Than it does with Joseph Smith's description of what was contained on the gold plates. Yes, well put. Well put. And I'm not up to date on all the latest and most up to date, apologetics. I used to be up to date and devour that stuff, but when I was into it, I don't recall anybody bringing this up. It was like not only did nobody defend against the problem, it was like nobody was even noting that there was a problem in the first place. Martin Harris gives no indication that he thinks it's a problem. I mean, that's why he's supposed to be going there, to have a real expert say, is this for real? And should I, mortgage my farm in order to finance the publication of this book? And according to this account, it says, hey, here's all these great languages that are on this plate that shouldn't be here because they shouldn't be on the gold plates.
Think about it from, again, if you start with the premise that Joseph is doing this fraudulently, intentionally, Martin Harris is going to give him $3,000 to print 5,000 copies of the Book of Mormon. Joseph goes, I've got to convince him. I got to convince him that I'm doing something real here. Why don't I take these characters off of Adam Clarke's Bible commentary, put them onto a piece of paper, and send Martin to experts who will certainly know that this is real characters of these other languages. And that's exactly what seems on the outside to have happened.
Yes. To correct something I said 4. One of them's Egyptian. The other 3 are different that shouldn't be there. In fact, the Egyptian shouldn't be there because according to the Book of Mormon, the Egyptian itself, the language itself, was transformed by them so much that it couldn't be understood by any other person. So I don't know why Charles Anthon would be the exception to that rule.
Shouldn't be.
All right, and we got to run and keep going here because I was about to say I actually think that particular verse may have been put into the Book of Mormon as a result of this encounter that Martin Harris had with Professor Anthon, where it says that nobody knows our language, no man knows our language. Why would you have that? And it's at the end of the Book of Mormon where there's nobody left except Lamanites, right? Nobody left. No man knoweth our language. Who cares? Except unless, I don't know, maybe Martin Harris came back from New York saying they couldn't read it. It was all bogus. Well, I got an answer for that. It got reformed. No man knoweth our language.
Yeah,
all right, continuing on.
Can I say one more thing? I know I'm slowing us down, but Measure is saying, wait, he got the characters from Adam Clarke. Let me start. You said this, but let me just reemphasize it, which is, it seems like based on the evidence, there are 2 different things. There is a piece of paper with Reformed Egyptian on it that we now call the Anthon manuscript that exists on the internet. You can Google search and you'll see these characters that nobody can quite figure out where they come from.
The one that has a diagram is pretty sure the famous forgery.
Yeah. Yes. But what you're saying is that there was something like that existed, and then there was something else that had these other languages symbols on it that would be assured to have experts go, those are real symbols of other real languages.
Well, Charles Anthon is saying I can identify them from all these different languages.
According to
what the hell all these different languages are doing on the Book of Mormon plates is anybody's guess.
According to Martin Harris, Charles Anthon is interviewed twice in newspapers, and I don't think he says it in his own account, but Martin Harris comes back excited and ready to drop $3,000 to get these books published.
And he does drop the money. He does seem to have been a bit of a gullible sort, if you know what I mean. And this is just an example of it, right? That he doesn't see that as a problem, but as evidence that the Book of Mormon is true. I don't know. But what we do know is he did go to New York. He did meet with Charles Anthon. He did come back, and that was to get his questions and his doubts answered. And he came back, and apparently with his doubts answered, he mortgages his farm and he finances the publication of the Book of Mormon.
And that would have done it. If I understand what you're saying. I should be smart enough to go, why the hell is Syriac and Arabic in Reformed Egyptian? That's the red flag that should be blazing. But also to have some expert in New York go, these are real symbols. This is real stuff. Would also, on the other hand, play into like Joseph Smith's onto something. Yeah.
And of course, we also have to take it with a huge grain of salt because we know that whoever's not telling the truth, that there's no way that any scholar, at least Anthon in New York, could have looked at Egyptian and then looked at a translation, especially Reformed Egyptian. The Book of Mormon tells us nobody knows it. Once again, I think that's reverse engineered into the Book of Mormon to respond to this. But there's no way that Anthon could have looked at Reformed Egyptian and the translation provided by Joseph Smith and said it was correct without being able to read the Reformed Egyptian. He couldn't have read regular Egyptian, much less Reformed Egyptian. Nobody else knows that language, the Book of Mormon tells us, except for the Nephites, the few Nephites that were still left.
Yes. So by by the faithful account, Martin Harris says that Anthon confirmed multiple languages when none of them should have anything to do with Reformed Egyptian.
Yes. Or more technically, at least Joseph Smith's account of Martin Harris's account that got put in the 1838 history.
Correct.
All right. Let's see here. Going on. In this essay, I argue, says Colby Townsend, that Smith, Joseph, had access to Adam Clarke's Bible commentary and used it in an idiosyncratic, often eclectic way to think through how to revise and restore what he, Joseph Smith, believed were the plain and precious truths that had been taken out of the Bible. Okay? He doesn't follow it everywhere. He doesn't follow it in any necessarily discernible way, except for the fact that Colby Townsend thinks he's discerned a method to the madness, which is that Joseph Smith has an overriding theological message. And he wants to use Isaiah and any changes to forward that message, right? So he's not just in an academic exercise. He's telling a story and preaching sermons through the mouths of different characters and using the Isaiah chapters in order to be interpreted by the fictional characters. I'll put fictional in quotation marks, such as Nephi and Jacob, who are quoting them in order to interpret them thereafter. Okay, the scattering, the gathering, we're on the isles of the sea, all these kinds of things. So, there are several key phrases that Joseph Smith added to the text of Isaiah that match, either word for word or nearly so, what Adam Clarke had revised or suggested the text in Isaiah should read. Adam Clarke, in turn, was dependent on prior biblical scholarship for his commentary on Isaiah. And here's Colby Townsend wanting to give credit where credit is due, because Adam Clarke takes a lot of what he does in this regard from another scholar, earlier scholar named Robert Louth, or Loth, L-O-W-T-H. I'm going to try and restrict this to Adam Clarke while noting that credit should be given to Robert Louth, just to try and keep it from getting too complicated.
Joseph wouldn't have got it from Louth. Joseph would have got it from Clarke, who got it from Louth. Yes.
So, thank you. He used the 18th century Isaiah commentary of Robert Louth, so 18th century, 1700s, often taking everything word for word from Louth's notes and occasionally altering the wording slightly or adding notes about variant readings for the given verse in manuscripts Clarke himself had access to. Clarke's dependence on Louth, though, is far more substantial than Smith's dependence on Clarke. So Clarke depends on Louth a lot more than Smith depends on Clarke. Smith enters into a conversation with Clarke's notes, sometimes agreeing with and adopting a new reading. At other times, when Joseph Smith made changes to the KJV text of Isaiah, he went his own way. The connections I make between Clarke's commentary and Smith's revised version of Isaiah in the Book of Mormon are unique to three texts. So he's got 8 connections he's going to set forth here, and they are unique to 3 texts: Louth's commentary, Clarke's commentary, and the Book of Mormon. That's significant. They're not in other commentaries. They're in these commentaries. They're in Louth. They're in Clarke, and Clarke got it from Louth and the Book of Mormon. I have not been able to find these exact phrases in any other commentaries for the passages on Isaiah of the English-speaking world prior to 1830. That's huge. That suggests a connection.
Can I put a comment up on the screen just to
Yeah.
show? So this guy's saying, is that the old form of the telephone game? God to Isaiah, Isaiah to Loth, Loth to Clarke, Clarke to Smith. By the way,
Ever's to tinker's to chance.
apologist will need to deal with this. We'll talk about this at the end, and I know we're going long, but we'll talk about this at the end a little bit about maybe the repercussions or ramifications of this. But it should be noted that apologists will, and already there's on the record at least some degree of solution to this, Blake Ostler's expansion theory. But inevitably, apologists will have to come up with workarounds for the data. They always do. There is no such thing as a nail in the coffin. Whenever we learn something like this, we go, this is devastating to the truth claims of Mormonism, and the apologists repackage it, make it indiscernible from a fraud, and move the goalpost, and we move on. That will happen here, no doubt. But this is the less rational way to see it, is that God talks to Isaiah, who talks to Loth, who talks to Clarke. Smith reads Adam Clarke's commentary and is inspired by God, by the gift and power of God to put
I
it
think
in.
God would just tell Joseph direct. It would cut out all those middlemen.
Yeah. Especially since not everything Clarke does is on point.
Mhm.
And Colby points this out, by the way. Sometimes Joseph Smith misunderstood Adam Clarke and put his misunderstanding into the Book of Mormon, and actually either missed a word or didn't quite understand where Clarke was going with his point, and ended up carrying a misunderstanding into the book. I've got notes here. I'll see if I can't find one of those.
Yeah.
But there are multiple ways in which Joseph Smith is interacting with
Yes.
Clarke's commentary.
What I want to say is this is a step further than Joseph Smith translation being adopting things from the Adam Clarke Bible commentary, okay? Because that is a translation. It's always been a bit ambiguous, right? He's not translating from gold plates or any characters involved. It's always been more intuitive and more spiritual in nature, this translation of the Bible thing. And therefore, the apologists have now, and the church have turned from what it was in the 70s and 80s, which is that the Joseph Smith translation itself was a restoration of what had been lost from the Bible. That's what Joseph Smith said. That's what everybody said until the 80s, the 90s. And now when everybody realizes that we've got hundreds and thousands of early manuscripts and none of them support the Joseph Smith changes to the Bible. And in those few wonderful, exhilarating exceptions to that rule where the changes do support it from the ancient manuscripts, then we find out that they were already mentioned in commentaries that Joseph Smith had access to in his day, such as the Adam Clarke Bible commentary. So it's changed, right? So now the version or the answer you get from the apologists is about the Joseph Smith translation. Well, it's a flawed commentary. It's not a restoration. It's not a revelation. It's not all the things that I was brought up being told it was and believing it was. It's just a flawed commentary. That's what the Joseph Smith translation is now being sold as because of all of its defects. The problem is that now, when it looks like not only the Joseph Smith translation relied upon the Adam Clarke Bible commentary, but the Isaiah chapters in the Book of Mormon as well, how do you say the Book of Mormon is just a flawed commentary?
Yeah, the problem again, Blake Ostler posits the expansion theory, which is that Joseph Smith, in translating the Book of Mormon, was permitted by God to bring in tons of things from his milieu. He was allowed to bring in the dream from his father. He was allowed to bring in some of the family dynamics of his home. He was allowed to bring in the sermons from down the street. He was allowed to bring in some of Methodism. He's allowed to bring in Adam Clarke's commentary.
But the one thing he's not allowed to do is to have made it up.
Yeah.
That's the expansion theory. Joseph Smith can do anything except have made it up.
Yeah, there has to still be a real Nephi, Alma, Mosiah, but their story is corrupted by Joseph Smith, who finds it more important to put his own details into the narrative rather than just read what's on the plates. Now, again, notice how much conjecture and allowances that is. And then I only say again here, this data insinuates that Joseph Smith was intimately familiar with what Adam Clarke was doing, how he was trying to correct the Bible, and Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon. And the Book of Mormon announces on the front end that it is an effort to correct things. And Joseph Smith comes to the project, bringing Adam Clarke into it in order to correct things. And it's sort of a coincidence. It's a coincidence that Joseph Smith is putting chapters into the Book of Mormon. Let me say it differently. It's a coincidence that ancient authors are putting into the Book of Mormon the Isaiah chapters, which is one of the focuses of volume 3 that we believe Joseph Smith has in his hands from Adam Clarke's commentary. It just so happens the ancient authors find Isaiah valuable, and the volume of Adam Clarke's commentary that Joseph Smith has and is working with finds lots of things in Isaiah to correct.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's a pretty difficult set of circumstances.
Yeah.
And the expansion theory has always been BS. And it's BS because if you took a book that everybody agreed was a complete fraud from beginning to end, the expansion theory would still prove it true. That's how you know it's worthless. If you got a theory that will prove an absolute fraud to be authentic, you need another theory.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's the collective witness model, isn't it? It's a way in order to see it as still as true, when really the best ways in science and critical thinking to decide something have determined that that is an absurd position to hold.
Yeah, as I've said before, the apologists are in a game right now, a competition to see who can come up with the best theory that answers all the questions without dealing with any of the issues.
Yeah.
And we've seen a number of those. So here we go. Once again, not reading. This is from the introductory material primarily. Then we'll get to his examples. Nephi. Okay. The precise reproduction of so much of the King James Version is difficult to explain otherwise. Other than that Joseph Smith had a King James Version with him and was copying or dictating or reading out loud, and the scribe was writing it down in those Isaiah chapters, okay? That's what he's talking about. That the precise reproduction of so much of the KJV is difficult to explain otherwise. Where I differ from these scholars is that I find it likely that the edition of the KJV that Joseph Smith was working from was the volume of Clarke's commentary that included all of the book of Isaiah. Yes, so excited about that. That was my summary too. I remember talking with Brian Hauglid about this some years ago, because I don't have an Adam Clarke's Bible commentary, but he does. And I was asking him about this. And I was asking him if the text of the Bible was in it. I didn't even know that years ago, right? And he said, yes, it is. And I said, well, we just had the commentary. Doesn't need to have a Bible. He has the commentary, and he's got the Bible plus the changes in the footnotes and in his commentary that's right below it on the same page that he's looking at when he's reading it off.
Yeah, this is what I was saying earlier. The issue where the Book of Mormon has the very heirs of the Bible in which the Smith family owned is that same issue is explained much more easily by saying the only book Joseph Smith has got involved here when it comes to the Bible or Adam Clarke's commentary. He only needs Adam Clarke's commentary. He doesn't need to have the Bible because it's already in Clarke's commentary.
Yes, exactly. If this is the case, then it would have been most, if not all, of volume 3 of the commentary. Maybe the edition published by Abraham Paul in New York in 1825. He's trying to figure out which commentary, volume 3, would have included Isaiah. That's what the significance of volume 3. If there's 6 volumes, 3 has Isaiah in it. Individual numbers of the volumes of Clarke's commentary, separated into gatherings that covered 1/10 of the volume, were readily available for sale at 50 cents each, or you could buy quarters of those tenths at 12.5 cents each. You can buy parts of the book in pamphlet form for less money. So you could get Isaiah cheaper than having to have the whole book. These are just things that he's noting as possibilities. Whether Joseph Smith had access to Clarke's commentary on Isaiah through borrowing a book from a Methodist preacher or Nathaniel Lewis, Emma's uncle, or whether he or someone he knew had access to it as published in smaller parts is unclear. I think it is a safe assumption, though, that Smith was using Clarke's notes as he revised Isaiah in the Book of Mormon toward the broader 19th century understanding that parts of the Bible had been corrupted in its physical form. Once again, circling back to this idea, this was a very, very common understanding in the region that Joseph Smith was in and in the Western world, where that higher criticism is coming over and now percolating down, even among those, the class that has less formal post-secondary education. Now we get to some of these examples, okay? So Isaiah 11:6, quoted in the Book of Mormon, the KJV is, "The wolf also shall." From Adam Clarke, and he has Clarke/Louth. I appreciate his giving credit. This is Adam Clarke. Then shall the wolf. And then Joseph Smith in the Book of Mormon, when it's quoting the same passage, says, and then shall the wolf. Now, this is small, but the strength of it is in its smallness, right? Why is it that if the KJV alone is being consulted, the wolf also shall, that the Book of Mormon comes out of nowhere with, and then shall the wolf, whereas Adam Clarke says, then shall the wolf? I'm not going to read all of his notes about these different examples. Please get the paper and read them. I will note here that in this example, Colby Townsend writes, Smith takes a block quotation from Isaiah and inserts it into two different locations in the Book of Mormon, and only alters the KJV on one of these two occasions. Now, this is of some interest and I think significance. To begin, in other words, this passage gets quoted two times in the Book of Mormon, in 2 Nephi 21 and again later on in 2 Nephi 30. The first time it follows the KJV strictly. The second time it seems to be influenced by the Adam Clarke Bible commentary. I'm going to keep reading because I believe that's correct. To begin, Isaiah 11:6 reads, the wolf also shall dwell with the lamb. Okay, the wolf also shall dwell with the lamb. In 2 Nephi 21:6, Smith uses the exact phrasing that appears in the KJV Isaiah without making any alterations, like I said. In fact, there are no differences between these passages the first time it shows up, and it gives the references there. Joseph Smith dictated the entire section of text precisely as it appeared in the KJV. This verbatim borrowing suggests that Smith was following the KJV at the text on the top of the page, without consulting the commentary notes the first time it's replicated in the Book of Mormon. At least not to find possible emendations while he was dictating the text of Isaiah 11 and 12 in 2 Nephi 21 and 22. Did you want to say something, Bill?
No, I just want folks to keep noticing the various ways in which Joseph is doing this. Yeah, it certainly becomes difficult to explain that this is an ancient translation with, maybe just a few little similarities to Clarke.
Yeah. And I'll tell everybody, I have never seen anybody. How old are you, Bill? Are you about 55 now?
46, my friend.
46? Okay. Well, you look older. But 46 years old, or so he says, 46 years old, and acting like a giddy little kid on Christmas morning when you texted me last night after having read the paper.
Yeah.
And you were over the moon. You were just giddy. And I think you still are to a certain extent. About the significance of this paper and what it means.
Yeah. I think this is comparable to 1967 when the papyri turns back up and everyone in the church has to confront the fact that the papyri being translated is not the Book of Abraham. I think this has those kinds of ripples because once you see how much Smith is working with Clarke's commentary, and again, it's a small portion of the Book of Mormon for sure, but it's enough instances that you have to wrestle with Joseph Smith bringing Clarke's commentary as a tool to an ancient translation of Nephites and Lamanites when he claims that he's putting spectacles on or a rock in the hat, and God, this is all done by the gift and power of God. And not only does it contain Clarke's commentary, it's got, again, sermons from down the street. It's got Joseph Smith Sr.'s dream. It's got dynamics that seem similar to Joseph Smith's family. It's got problems in the text that you've been pointing out over the last year and a half in terms of the king's names and
Right.
Mosiah priority and other issues we find. And it comes a point, if you can sit with all of it collectively, it's just so much more rational to go, this is made up. This issue alone points to that. But then you look at all the other issues and you go, this is a premeditated project. Joseph Smith, or whoever the author is, Sidney Rigdon, whatever, it doesn't matter to me who it is. Whoever comes to this project as being the brain behind it, they come to it with intention to carry this out. This isn't, let me go grab Clarke's commentary in the middle of the Book of Mormon translation and see what he has to say. The book's premise is to fix the very things that Clarke fixes.
All right. Very good. I'll continue to the next paragraph. And yeah. However, within the notes on Isaiah 11:6, we find that Adam Clarke offers a meaningful alternative translation for the opening phrase. Instead of the wolf also shall dwell, Clarke renders the phrase as, then shall the wolf. This alternative translation inserts a coordinating conjunction, then, into the expression and reverses the subject's order and the modal verb. By the way, that is all Greek to me. If you understand that, you're a better person than I am. Going on. Significantly, this same alteration also appears in the Book of Mormon, right? That was what we had before. That's why he starts out showing those three. When incorporating this Isaiah passage for the second time in the Book of Mormon, in 2 Nephi 30, verses 9 through 15, Joseph Smith alters the text. First time, he follows the KJV. Second time, he reproduces the same Isaiah text. Now he incorporates the emendation suggested by Clarke in the commentary on the same page. Okay, because Joseph Smith had to go back to the same page in order to do the same text over. Apart from initiating the verse with "and," Joseph Smith follows Clarke's retranslation exactly, then shall the wolf. This verbatim borrowing suggests that Smith was following the main body of the Isaiah passages and consulting Clarke's notations during the process on the same page. Moreover, this offers clues regarding Joseph Smith's style. Rather than slavishly following his source text in order to establish strict textual consistency, Joseph Smith reveals a dynamic process of ongoing evaluation, selection, and modification in the way that he articulates his choices.
These are well thought out. He's been thinking about how he wants to accomplish this. This isn't in the moment referencing Clarke. This is time and energy spent being familiar with what Clarke is trying to accomplish and thinking about which ideas to use and in which ways to use them.
Here's a second example, second of 8. These are the ones he finds only in these three sources, right? Book of Mormon, Adam Clarke, and Louth that Adam Clarke's borrowing from. So here's Isaiah 52. The KJV is, their fish stinketh because there is no water and dieth for thirst. Adam Clarke says their fish is dried up. I'm going to emphasize that up. Their fish is dried up because there is no water and dieth away for thirst. Then the Book of Mormon, Smith says, and their fish to stink because the waters are dried up, and they dieth because of thirst. Now, that up there is one of the things that is changed. In other words, there is no up in KJV for dried up. It's just dried. Actually, there's no dry in the KJV at all. The dried up, yes, I'm just trying to scan it to make sure I'm correct. The entire expression dried up is not in the KJV, but is in Adam Clarke and in the Book of Mormon. See that? In Clarke, it's the fish is dried up. In the Book of Mormon, the waters are dried up. So in 2 Nephi 6:16, Joseph Smith continues the block quotation of Isaiah 49:24, picking up where he left off, which was similarly a continuation of the block quotation of Isaiah 49, etc. Comparing this quotation to its KJV source, we find a significant variant. Between 2 Nephi 7:2 and Isaiah 52, the last half of the verse in the KJV reads, "Behold, at my rebuke I dry up the sea, I make the rivers a wilderness. Their fish stinketh because there is no water, and dieth for thirst." And in his notes, Clarke has, "Their fish stinketh, their fish is dried up." See, Clarke has a parenthetical phrase that renders their fish stinketh in an alternative manner, which appears to be adopted in the Book of Mormon's quotation of Isaiah, but it's not in the KJV. Any thoughts about that, Bill?
No, just it's everyone, believer or not, should begin to be overwhelmed. You're going to have to figure out how you explain methodical use of Adam Clarke's commentary in the Book of Mormon. It's not just the use of Adam Clarke, which is its own problem, but the methodical use by Joseph Smith in a way that shows that he thought about all of this and thought about how he could do these things. And then notice that the Book of Mormon sets out at the forefront that its goal is to correct some of these things. I can't hear you, RFM.
I'm saying, right, it's right there in the Book of Mormon. This is the goal of this book, partially to correct the corruptions that have entered into passages from the Bible that we'll be quoting in their original and pristine form. All right, so the next one, which is the third example, I believe, Isaiah 2:10. The KJV has, and for the glory of his majesty, Adam Clarke says, and from the glory of his majesty, when he ariseth to strike the earth with terror. Now look at the strike part, okay? There's a hitting going on that is not present in the King James Version, which just says, and for the glory of his majesty. Clarke says, adds to it, when he ariseth to strike the earth with terror. The Book of Mormon, Joseph Smith says, and the glory of his majesty shall smite thee. So there you can see how it adopts this idea of striking or smiting from Clarke in the Book of Mormon, an idea that is not present in the same passage from Isaiah in the King James Version. All right, I'll continue. I'll bet Bill's going to be back any second now. After a handful of minor variants, a handful of minor variants, which he's not going to talk about here, between these passages, Smith added a phrase to the end of verse 10. He's still talking about that last thing. In the KJV, this part of the verse reads, for fear of the Lord and for the glory of his majesty. Smith deleted the second for, likely because it seemed redundant in its proximity to the first occurrence, and added the glory of his majesty shall smite thee. There's that hit. Smith added similar additions in verses 19 and 21. Now, the end of Isaiah 22:19 in the KJV reads, and for the glory of his majesty, when he arises to shake terribly the earth. So there's a shaking terribly, but not the smiting. And the end of verse 21 reads similarly, for fear of the Lord and for the glory of his majesty, when he arises to shake terribly the earth. In both Book of Mormon verses 19 and 21, the same two phrases are added to the beginning and end of the KJV phrases, shall come upon them and shall smite them. Okay. Now here's the fourth one out of 8, Isaiah 9:3, KJV, thou hast multiplied the nation and not increased the joy. Now this is significant, okay? This is significant because this isn't sort of just a little change. This completely reverses the meaning. The KJV says, and not increase the joy. God, thou hast multiplied the nations and not increase the joy. Clarke says, mistranslation, thou hast increased their joy is what it should be. Not, thou hast not increased their joy. It should be the opposite. Thou hast increased their joy. What does the Book of Mormon do? The Book of Mormon follows Adam Clarke at the contradiction of the King James Version and says, thou hast multiplied the nation and increased their joy. Or increase the joy. And I don't know that I have to say that much else about that. That one's striking to me. That's not changing it 5% or 10% or 15%, although in some ways those are remarkable in that they are relatively meaningless. So the comparisons and the changes seem more important, right? Less likely to have happened by accident when it's minor. This one's 180 degrees out of phase. And so it strikes me as really unlikely and very strange that it should contradict, the Book of Mormon contradicts the King James Version that it's quoting on this Isaiah chapter 9, verse 3, and matches the Adam Clarke Bible commentary. Here is number 5, Isaiah 14:3. The King James Version says, and it shall come to pass that in the day that, then there's a ellipses, and then verse 4 says, that thou shalt. Adam Clarke says, and it shall come to pass in that day, verse 4, and thou shalt. And then Joseph Smith in the Book of Mormon says, and it shall come to pass in that day, in verse 4, and it shall come to pass in that day. This is something that you got to read the explanation, but I believe what it's saying is that it took the first and it come to pass in that day from the KJV, right? And it took the second and it shall come to pass in that day from Clarke's commentary, and added them together and had both expressions. Even though they're both similar, they both occur only once in the KJV and Clarke, but they appear twice in the Book of Mormon. I think that's the idea there. If not, Colby, I apologize, but you should have come on the show.
By the way, if you were going to make the argument, this is a coincidence, then you might expect to find some of these kinds of changes, but you're finding multiple kinds of changes that are best explained as coming from Adam Clarke. In other words, when Joseph is translating Reformed Egyptian using the gift and power of God and taking that Reformed Egyptian and putting it into English, we would expect where he puts the Isaiah chapters for there to be some differences. Most of these differences can be explained. First off, these differences aren't all the same. They're different kinds of differences. Sometimes they're a combination of things. Sometimes they're avoiding one and using the other. But at the end of the day, it's multiple kinds of differences in many of the changes that the author of the Book of Mormon makes to the text are found in Adam Clarke's commentary. That's a strange coincidence. So it seems to me that Mormonism has come this far, its apologists have come this far. You're going to see it. They already acknowledge that Adam Clarke is in the Joseph Smith translation. This evidence seems strong enough that you're going to see apologists acknowledge that Adam Clarke is in the Book of Mormon, and they're going to have a workaround for that.
Mm-hmm.
But the acknowledgement itself makes the Book of Mormon entirely different than Joseph Smith or Mormonism claimed it was from 1830 until just a few years ago.
Terrell Givens is already there. If anybody's leading the way on this, it's Terrell Givens. To account for, to accept, to acknowledge, and then to applaud and proclaim all the sources from which Joseph Smith was borrowing in creating not only the Book of Mormon, but Mormonism itself. He identifies them all throughout. And whereas an outsider might look at that and say, well, obviously he's putting everything together and creating a religion out of odds and ends from other people's religion and religious beliefs and Bible commentaries. But Terrell Givens puts out that he is convinced, no, that these selections that he makes from what to pick and what not to pick, that's all what's guided by the revelation from God. So it's like he's going through the grocery store and he's going down, the produce aisle, and he's picking carrots and he's picking the peas, but he's not picking the Brussels sprouts, thank God. He's not picking the asparagus, thank God. And so therefore, God is guiding him in what he's taking. And then from the meat section and some with the frozen food aisle, everything, okay? All of that's being directed by God. So even though we can account for every single thing that Joseph Smith put into Mormonism and where he took it from, and Terrell Givens does that and acknowledges it, his theory is that, yeah, that's how God revealed the one true and living church.
By adding extra steps, you're taking something that's less rational. You don't need to go that far. All you need to do is make the argument that Joseph Smith is borrowing sources from his day and creating the Book of Mormon. It's unnecessary because why does, you always say this, why does God need a starship? Why does God need Adam Clarke when he's given Joseph magic glasses and a magic rock and a hat to bury his face into, and that's the best way to get Reformed Egyptian into English? And why does God trust Joseph Smith to lose parts of the story of Nephi and Alma by putting Adam Clarke into the book?
These are all good questions, but I expect the answer from the apologist will have something to do with faith and the need for Joseph Smith to be matured as a prophet. That's usually the way these things go. All right, so here we go. That was the one we just did. I think this is number 6 now. Isaiah 48:11, where the King James Version has, "For how should my name be polluted?" And Clarke says, "For how would my name be blasphemed?" And Smith goes with, "For how should I suffer my name to be polluted. And I think it's that suffer that is the main thing here in the commentary. Once again, please get this and read it. I'm just going to read a brief bit here. In the center of Isaiah 48:11, we have the phrase, "For how should my name be polluted?" In his notes, Clarke observes that the word Shemi, my name, is dropped out of the text. The tacit assumption is that the words my name were in the original text, though dropped out by accident in later versions. Even so, the words my name remain italicized in the King James Version because they are a speculative edition of what the original words might have been. So those italicized words, my name in the KJV at the top, those are there in the KJV. Clarke goes on to note that the Syriac and Vulgate translations circumvented this problem by rephrasing the verse. Instead of, "For how should my name be polluted?" they substituted the phrase, "that I may not be blasphemed." Clarke describes the alteration as making the verb in the first person, that is, the first person subject I replaces my name in the alternative rendering. Okay. So I've got to tell you, I'm not sure that this is one of the ones where I really wish that Colby could have made it, because I'm taking his word for it that it's significant, but I'm not sure that I'm catching all of it. Do you understand this better than I, Bill, perhaps?
No, I don't. So maybe, Dan Vogel or Jackson Washburn, I think, has probably a little more expertise sort of in this arena. If they want to comment, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm taking it. I'm accepting that the problem here is with me.
It seems like what the suggestion there is that the original scripture says something. Clarke's commentary suggests that a change is needed. Joseph doesn't like the change that's suggested and inserts a different change in its place. Is that?
I think maybe what's going on here, and I don't have all of his commentary reproduced here, just so everybody knows. Like I said, I'm not reading the whole paper. I think maybe what it has to do with the fact that my name is italicized in the KJV. And when Joseph Smith, he knew that the italicized words means that they're not there in the original. It was very common for him to either delete those or use those as places where he could substitute other things if he saw fit. It's in italicized in the KJV. That signals to Joseph Smith they weren't there in the original. In Clarke, they are there, and so Smith follows Clarke in keeping them there. Maybe that's the point, and maybe it's something in addition to that, or completely different altogether. All right, here's 49:1, and this is, I think there's this one and one more. Oh, this is familiar. "Listen, O isles, unto me," says the King James Version. Remember the isles of the sea that the Nephites are just convinced that they are on one, that they're on an island in the sea, and so these passages have special application to them. "Listen, O isles, unto me," says KJV. Adam Clarke has, "Hearken unto me, O ye distant lands." By the way, I notice here it just has Clarke and not Clarke/Louth, and I wonder if this is one of the changes that he didn't borrow from Louth. But it says Clarke, hearken in his commentary, "Hearken unto me, O ye distant lands." That's kind of different, isn't it? "Listen, O isles, hearken unto me." That's like listen, but "O ye distant lands," the isles. And the Book of Mormon goes, and again, hearken. He takes the hearken from Clarke, "O ye house of Israel." He gets the hearken, the "O ye." He changes house of Israel from distant lands. It seems clear he's following Clarke with the hearken and the "O ye," but he changes distant lands to house of Israel. And this is one of the places where Colby Townsend points out that he is changing, he's using this, but he's not just using it slavishly. He's also using it to promote his message in the Book of Mormon, which is the house of Israel. It's not just distant lands. It's the house of Israel that are upon those distant lands that the message is to. So the KJV of Isaiah 49:1 reads, actually, we know this because that's up there. And Clarke breaks this verse into two parts for his note. Once again, I won't read all of this. I think I got the main part of that correct. Oh, here he goes with this. Like the example in Isaiah 48:16, the parallel language shows a developmental line of emendation, right? We also find in both Isaiah 48:16 and 49:1 that Smith was not simply following Clarke wholesale, not slavishly, like I said, but creating his new readings based on his engagement with Clarke. He was analyzing the content and making continuous adjustments to fit the narrative of the Book of Mormon. That's what's going on here, according to Colby.
In other words, this isn't just a direct plagiarism where Joseph is just copying and pasting things over.
Right.
Joseph is intellectually and methodically working through Clarke's ideas, deciding what's useful and what isn't, and implementing his own version of Clarke's work into the Book of Mormon.
Right, which does sound very different than, oh, I'm translating the Book of Mormon and I've got Isaiah chapters and I need a Bible. Oh, hand me that Adam Clarke Bible commentary that I've never seen in my life. It does look like he has some experience with it and he's using it in a premeditated, as you said, way to accomplish these changes.
Yep.
To make the Book of Mormon Isaiah more accurately, or attempt to more accurately look like Isaiah in 600 BCE. Although with Deutero-Isaiah, that itself would be its own anomaly, and Trito-Isaiah as well. He also says Smith's use of House of Israel, rather than the original distant lands that I pointed out, inserts a much more specific reference. Rather than a general call that ostensibly goes out to all people in distant lands, Joseph Smith's interpolation changes this text into a call delivered precisely to the house of Israel. This alteration, a clarification identifying the scattered houses of Israel, can be further explained by Clarke's notes. So I believe this is the last one, number 8, Isaiah 29:11. Hey, this is about the Book of Mormon. We know this one. This is about the gold plates and the sealed portion. The King James Version says, I cannot, for it is sealed. Adam Clarke says, I cannot read it, for it is sealed up. Now notice the read it gets added there, and up gets added to sealed. Okay? KJV, it doesn't say I cannot. I cannot read it, for it is sealed. Although I think in the context of the KJV, it must be talking about reading. Joseph Smith in the Book of Mormon has the things which are sealed up. And then in verse 18, I cannot read it. So the end of Isaiah 29:11 reads in the KJV, read this, I pray thee, and he saith, I cannot, for it is sealed. See, I knew it was in there. In his notes for this verse, Clarke expands the KJV text from I cannot, for it is sealed, to I cannot read it, for it is sealed up. Okay? So contextually, yeah, read it would make sense, but he's adding it in order to make it more clear. And then I don't go on with this. Once again, please read the paper. We're already at over 2 minutes, 2 hours and 15 minutes. And we would be here substantially longer if we went through the entire paper. Leave something for you to discover. It's an incredible paper, a monumental contribution to Book of Mormon studies and Mormon studies. So conclusion here on tonight's episode is this. It appears that not only did Joseph Smith use the Adam Clarke Bible commentary for his 1831 to 33 or 1830 to 33 inspired version of the Bible, the JST, he also used the Adam Clarke Bible commentary for his translation of the Book of Mormon. Now, if he had the Adam Clarke Bible commentary with him when he's translating the Book of Mormon, that would seem to contradict something that Emma Smith said later in life, I think 1879. It's called The Testimony of Emma Smith. When she was asked by her son, I believe it was, the third, about Joseph Smith and the translation of the Book of Mormon. Hey, Bill, do you want to read this? I've been going on for quite a while.
Yep.
I want to give you a chance. I don't want to, if you're doing
you're
something.
good. Okay. Question here. By the way, I'll just note to folks, the phone lines are open, 662-667-6667, or 662 Mormons if you want to do it that way. I also put the link in the live chat that you can come right into the studio. If you want to be anonymous, just make sure your camera's turned off, and put a name in that nobody would recognize you by.
Free Mormon.
Yeah, feel free to do that. And then, so the phone lines are open and you're welcome to come into the studio. We'd love to hear from you. We're getting, to the point where sometime in the near future, we'll take 3 of you and give you a chance to say something. So please join the conversation. We'd love to have you. All right. So question, had he not a book or manuscript from which he read or dictated to you? Answer, he had neither manuscript nor book to read from. Question, could he not have had and you not know it? Answer, if he had anything of the kind, he could not have concealed it from me.
So that's Emma answering questions later in life in 1879 about her role in the translation as scribe of the Book of Mormon in 1828, actually. Now, 1828, she's a scribe for what becomes the lost 116 pages. She is the primary scribe, I believe, for that. that gets lost. Okay, so we don't know what's in the 116 pages. We might have a few glimpses from Don Bradley, but we don't have the documents themselves. They're lost. So when 1829 now rolls around and April comes in and Oliver Cowdery shows up, now Emma's there, but she's not really much of a scribe. So she's not really writing down as Joseph Smith dictates. She's present though. Okay. She is absolutely present for that. So it's not like when she says that Joseph Smith had no book or manuscript from which he read or dictated to you. If, as it seems, Joseph Smith did have in his possession the Adam Clarke Bible commentary while he was doing the dictation, the only thing that we know first off is that he had it during the Book of Mormon translation, what we have today, not the 116 pages when she was the main scribe, although she certainly would have been present to see what the heck was going on. It's a small place. And it is hard to understand how, if Joseph Smith is using on a regular basis for the Isaiah chapters, the Adam Clarke Bible commentary, that his wife doesn't know it. There, I said it.
Yeah, and it also seems like it would be bothersome, again, if I'm Martin Harris or David Whitmer or John Whitmer or I don't know.
Oliver Cowdery must have known.
Oliver Cowdery. It seems like if this is supposed to be an ancient translation and Joseph is referencing Adam Clarke's commentary, I would be like, whoa, hold on a minute. Why are we doing this? Why are we consulting some guy in today's time about what should be in the scriptures when you've got the access to God? And none of the witnesses tell us that, but they don't tell us that about the Joseph Smith translation either.
They don't. And Joseph Smith could have been doing all of this under the auspices of just needing a Bible to use for the Isaiah chapters, let's say, or for the Sermon on the Mount. And I'm just using it for the Bible part, whereas the commentary is on the same page underneath.
Yeah, but the one place I would push back on you here to sort of say maybe there's something else going on is that Joseph intimates that he has the Nephite spectacles, the Nephite interpreters. And it becomes quite obvious that those, whatever people claim to sort of have seen those or actively engaged with those seem sort of distant from the real sources of saying what happened. And most of the trusted scholarship today indicates that it was simply the rock and the hat.
Right.
And yet you can tell by the way that Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, Martin Harris, and others, one of the Pratt brothers went around and gathered up sort of all the evidence on the translation methods there. A lot of the quotes we have come from their interviews. One of them, I can't remember if it was Parley or Orson. I think it was Orson. Interviewing various people involved in the translation and putting what got said out into the secondhand or third hand out in public, also gathered those quotes up. And I'll just note that the witnesses to the Book of Mormon seem to be helping Joseph maintain a narrative around the Nephite spectacles while also answering at times that it was just a rock and a hat. And it occurs to me that the way in which that all sort of unfolds, it's like they're going along with Joseph's need to make it sound more magical and biblical than the process is. They're quick to call it the Urim and Thummim because they sort of recognize that saying a rock and a hat is problematic.
Yeah, and something I just wanted to say in passing was that every Mormon who's been a member of the Mormon Church for more than 5 minutes knows this passage from this otherwise obscure document, except the fact it gets brought up all the time in Mormon materials and in Mormon classes, is this Q&A from the testimony of Emma Smith, because we want to use it to establish Joseph Smith didn't have access to any other books. He wasn't cribbing off of any other manuscripts during the Book of Mormon translation, in spite of the textual evidence that shows that he did. And then we also have the last Q&A. There's a second page to this, by the way, so this isn't everything. But the last Q&A on this page are you sure that he had the plates at the time you were writing for him? And she says, yes, they lay on the table often, the plates, without any attempt at concealment, wrapped in a small linen tablecloth. I always love that one. No attempt at concealment, except they're wrapped in a cloth, which I had given him to fold them in. I once fell to the plates as they thus lay on the table, tracing their outline and shape. They seemed to be pliable like thick paper. Say it with me, we can all say this. And would rustle with a metallic sound when the edges were moved by the thumb, as one does sometimes thumb the edges of a book. We've all heard that a dozen times at least in the Mormon church. What we never hear in church materials or lessons is the first question and answer that appears immediately before those faith-promoting answers. And this is the one that was kept hidden by the church by intentionally not reproducing the entire testimony. And we know that they knew about it because they are quoting Q&A from the same damn document. So obviously they know about the other Q&As in the document, and they chose to keep those from the members of the church. Can you read the first one, Bill?
What is the truth of Mormonism? Answer, Emma Smith says, I know Mormonism to be the truth and believe the church to have been established by divine direction. I have complete faith in it. In writing for your father, I frequently wrote day after day, often sitting at the table close by him, he sitting with his face buried in a hat with the seer stone in it, and dictating hour after hour with nothing between.
Yeah, that one didn't make the final cut. So that was hidden by the church because they were big on not letting people know that Joseph Smith dictated the Book of Mormon by putting his seer stone in his hat, putting his face over the hat, and then dictating words. Okay. They didn't like that image. So they cut out this history. They hid this part of the history. So they do this over and over and over again until finally the internet exposed this information to enough people to where the church figured that we can't hide this anymore. So then they started publishing the essays, and they put this information about the seer stone in the essay finally, which if you're lucky, you can find on the church website. Not that it's not there, because it is. It's just hard to find, and intentionally so.
Yeah, the point I was trying to make is, and we ought to do an episode on this at some point, but we ought to take all of the quotes about the translation. One easy document that you can go out there and find. The Interpreter did a document about seer stones and spectacles. There's a lot of the quotes in that. Fair Mormon has somewhere, I don't know if it's easy to find because it takes me a long time to get it, but there's a document in Fair Mormon that lists all the quotes about the translation. And what I found when I read that was there was a lot of them. There's a lot by various members of the Three Witnesses. There's a lot by the surrounding public crowd. There's a lot by other members of the Whitmer family. There is some things by, again, I think it's Orson Pratt who gathers in quotes. And what I'm trying to communicate is that while Smith starts off talking Nephite spectacles, everyone involved sees that it's a seer stone in a hat, but they're willing to go along with Joseph and obfuscate the issue by always referencing Urim and Thummim, and doing so in a way as to portray it as biblical God magic, rather than a more embarrassing story about treasure digging and stones and hats.
Yeah.
And it seems like everybody got on board with Joseph to help convey the narrative a certain way.
And I don't want to rehash old ground, but virtually everything from Joseph Smith's early days of treasure digging became metamorphized into biblical antecedents. So you've got the treasure guardian who becomes an angel. You've got the treasure, the gold treasure seeking, which becomes the gold plates. You have the seer stone, which becomes a Urim and Thummim. I believe William W. Phelps is the first person that's known to have used that expression in regard to the seer stone. I think it was 1833 when he said that. And he also likened it to the seraphim. Seraphim, teraphim. But we don't have to go there. So let's go to this. By the way, before you leave tonight, I know we're long. There's a real incredible thing to expose here. And I'm talking about scholarship, and I'm talking about the Apocrypha. All right. Once again, the Apocrypha are the 14 or so, I think it's 14 books between the Old and the New Testament. That's the Apocrypha. Okay. It's not anything else. It's a specific name that has a specific meaning as well as a general meaning. This is the specific meaning, those 14 books. All right. What about the Apocrypha? Okay. You're going to love this one. Remember, we know about the Apocrypha because of section 91 in the Doctrine and Covenants. That when Joseph Smith is doing his Bible translation between 1830 and 1833, he does the Old Testament, he does the New Testament. And at some point, he comes to the Apocrypha because his Bible has the Apocrypha in it. True story. Ours doesn't, unless you go and get one that has it, because this one has it. But our LDS Bibles don't. It's the same as most Protestant Bibles today. And usually it's just that maybe the Catholic Bible. Is it the Douay Rheims or Douay Rhymes, however they pronounce it, that has the Apocrypha in it. But Joseph Smith, happily translating, comes to the Apocrypha and says, hey, God, should I spend my time translating, correcting, revising, doing the old JST on the Apocrypha like the Old and the New Testament you've commanded me to do? This is March 9th, 1833. God tells him, no, you don't have to. God says, verily, thus saith the Lord unto you concerning the Apocrypha, there are many things contained therein that are true, and it is mostly translated correctly. Just like the rest of the Bible, by the way. 2, there are many things contained therein that are not true, which are interpolations by the hands of men, just the same as the rest of the Bible, by the way, from the Mormon point of view, from Joseph Smith's point of view. But God says that and then says, because it's the same as the rest of the Bible, you don't have to translate it like you have to translate the rest of the Bible. This is a huge non sequitur. God says now, verily, in verse 3, verily I say unto you that it is not needful that the Apocrypha should be translated. Therefore, whoso readeth it, let him understand, for the Spirit manifesteth truth, and whoso is enlightened by the Spirit shall obtain benefit therefrom. And whoso receiveth not by the Spirit cannot be benefited. Therefore, it is not needful that it should be translated. Amen. You could say that whole damn thing about the entire project of the Joseph Smith translation. But the Apocrypha is on a lesser order because it is not considered to be authoritative like the Old Testament and the New Testament is. Now, I remember being on the phone with Brian Hauglid. Once again, a number of years ago. He's got the old Adam Clarke Bible commentary. I don't. And I said, can you grab a volume? He said, yeah. Can you look at this? Yeah. I said, I know he does the Old Testament and I know he does the New Testament. Does the Adam Clarke Bible commentary contain the Apocrypha? And he's gone for a while and he's looking, because he has to look through all of them, right? And he comes back, nope, no Apocrypha in the Adam Clarke Bible commentary. And I said, well, isn't that interesting that here's Joseph Smith theoretically using the Adam Clarke Bible commentary in his translation process of the Bible. He gets to the Apocrypha, right? But it's not in his Bible. It's in this other Bible, but it's not in the Adam Clarke Bible commentary. And now all of a sudden, at the precise location where there is no commentary from Adam Clarke, God tells Joseph Smith he doesn't have to do the Joseph Smith translation on the Apocrypha. Coincidence? I don't know. What do you think, Bill?
Adam Clarke's commentary on the Bible does not provide verse-by-verse commentary on the Apocrypha. His massive multi-volume work focuses on the 66 books of the Protestant canon. As a Methodist theologian writing in the early 19th century, Clarke aligned with the typical Protestant stance of his time. The apocryphal books were not considered divinely inspired, and thus were not granted the same level of attention or analysis. He does reference the Apocrypha, but he doesn't use them. He just references them as literary sources. So I think of Dana Carvey on Saturday Night Live as the church lady. Isn't that convenient? Yeah. Because that's what he does. He comes to a moment where he could clarify the Apocrypha, but he doesn't have the expert's analysis. So in that instance, God doesn't want him to do that.
When we know what we now know through Colby Townsend's research and the research of other people before him, now it sort of makes sense. Section 91, we could almost anticipate that would be the revelation that God would give him. To not translate where the thing that's allowing you to translate these other chapters from the Bible, both Old Testament and New Testament, it's not there. So let's just skip that, shall we?
If the cliff notes aren't available on a certain book, you don't have the ability to take the shortcut.
Yeah, you're screwed.
Yeah. So there's that.
So that is the presentation for tonight on the called Cracking the Code, Tracing Book of Mormon Origins. That's one title. Has two titles. We're starting to have two titles for our shows now. One on the thumbnail and one on the title part down below. So, and the other one is The Great and Abominable Plagiarism.
Yeah, and by the way, we been asked to sort of do that. We've got a person who's helping us out with our YouTube channel. I don't know if he wants his name known or not, so I'm not saying it, but
He doesn't want any more business.
yeah, well, he might. If he does, he can notify me, and we'll mention him over and over again over the upcoming months. But
Yeah.
he notified us that it's important that the thumbnail have one title to it, and then the text of the title be different. And
Right.
I know we've got 2 people down below. We've got 2 calls in the call queue. But before we get to you 4 folks, I just want to give you a second and me a second to sort of say whatever this means. What is all of this mean to you? This research by Colby Townsend. And by the way, I want to put his project up on the screen so that folks can know where to find it. I'll put the link here in the show. So let me get rid of this and put this up. So this is EEGRUYTER.com. In the comments is the link to the article. It is $42 to purchase it. I think well worth it. I know that sounds maybe like a little bit expensive, but this is really great scholarship academic work. So this is totally
And that's
worth
just
it.
the article, just so you know. That's that one article. Of course, it's the
Yeah.
most important article in the book as far as we're concerned, I imagine.
Yeah. This is a big deal. And
This
so
would be
there's
probably the most important article in any book for us.
yeah. Your thoughts on this topic? What do you take away from this, and what do you think it means for the future of apologetics, or maybe even Mormonism?
Well, let me tell you the significance of this, and it's been going on for a few years now. We're not talking about all of it tonight, but in general, Matthew Roper, he's an apologist with Fair Mormon. You probably met him once. You ever met Matt?
I think at the church history department, perhaps.
Well, he did a paper that had some influence in apologetic circles a number of years ago called Boomerang Hits in the Book of Mormon. And they were things that in the Book of Mormon, the argument is that look like they are anachronisms. They look like they're problems with the text, but then when you find out more, it ends up being a proof for the Book of Mormon. So that's why it's a boomerang hit for the Book of Mormon. What's ending up happening here is that this is going the other way with the boomerang. These are certain instances where textual variants in the Book of Mormon, biblical textual variants in the Book of Mormon, were pointed to as being proof of the Book of Mormon's authenticity. And now that we're seeing that the information regarding these changes and alterations that the Book of Mormon makes in the Bible text were available to Joseph Smith in customary and well-known and well-used Bible commentaries of his day, like the Adam Clarke Bible commentary, all of a sudden now that proof of the Book of Mormon is starting to look like a real revelation, not from God, but a revelation into how Joseph Smith reproduced the Bible passages from Isaiah and the Book of Mormon.
Do you think that Mormonism gets to a point where it has to acknowledge that the Book of Mormon is, as Terrell Givens called it, a bricolage, or as Anthony Miller's called it, Joseph Smith, and as an eclectic, by the way, that word was used earlier in Colby Townsend's article, an eclectic aggregator, that Joseph wasn't doing what we claimed he was doing. He was simply taking outside sources from his day and creating his own religious narrative, and will somehow just hold on to the fact that that was inspired anyway.
Yeah.
And by the way, to Blake Ostler and his expansion theory, Blake, you're going to have to go one more step, and you're going to have to account for Joseph's coming to the project, understanding Adam Clarke, what Clarke is doing, and methodically picking and choosing which things to use and not use, and doing so in a way that seems to show a deep familiarity with the commentary, not superficial and just using it last minute in the translation, but coming to the project informed by it. And then you knock the thing over anyway.
Yes, it was this thing that you gave me. Fortunately, it was not full and open. It was not full, but it was open.
Yeah.
Yes. You know what Terrell Givens' favorite disco song is to dance to? I'm a Brick Olage by the Commodores.
Oh yeah. Well, is that the Brick House, or
he's mighty, mighty, just letting it all hang out?
Yeah. It's a brick. Ow.
There you go. I need to do it. You should
All
see
right.
Terrell dance to that. It's awesome.
Oh,
He's got a 3-part suit, and the shirt is open at the collar, made of nylon.
yeah. All right. So I've got 2 folks. Is there anything else you want to say before I go to the?
No. I
Hello?
mean, we're doing disco jokes at this point. We better go to callers.
All right. So Kendall, I'm going to go to you first. Let me change the screen here so that we can see you. Kendall, welcome back to the Mormonism Live. How are you doing tonight?
Hey, doing great. Great episode. This is right up there with like comparisons to View of the Hebrews, the first book of Napoleon. I mean, this is quality stuff. Loving it.
Yeah.
Thank
It's
you.
a game changer.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, so that's actually my question is like, I mean, when you see the side-by-side passages, similarities, I mean, like, it's pretty apparent, it's pretty damning, but we all know, all 3 of us know intimately that will not persuade most believers. Like, they can find a way to make it work, and they have good reasons to want to be, totally on board that, no, that there's an explanation for this. My faith can survive this. So my question is, assuming at the outset that the person you're talking to will not change their position, will not change their mind, no matter what facts you're going to say, what is the next most worthy goal with that person? I.e., being convinced is off the table. What serves the overall good of the world, in your opinions, when having correct ideas about reality is off the table?
I'll say that if you can, again, it's already happening with the Joseph Smith translation, right? It's a commentary. You're already seeing Brad Wilcox, Saints Unscripted, Kwaku, when he was with them, they're all noting that because they see the evidence and they're making it indiscernible from a fraud, and moving the goalpost is just changing the definition. But when you change enough definitions, you water down the church. Again, prophets, seers, and revelators, having them at the helm has caused us to have less and less certainty about things in Mormonism. And eventually, and I think you're already seeing it, you create enough watered down topics in Mormonism. The Book of Mormon becomes more watered down by this issue. It's the one thing they'll push back at, but it is happening, is that the trust in prophets to be good vehicles for getting truth from God is also becoming more and more distrusted by the believer. So by throwing the scholarship out there and forcing the apologists in the church to acknowledge it, you end up in the long run with a more watered down church where people choose more often to go with their intuition and inner gut about things and stop turning their lives over and maybe even their money over to an institution that has misused it and misrepresented every facet of their truth claims.
Yeah, I think we all see over time the lowering of the standards for what a prophet is.
And what the priesthood is. The priesthood is nothing now any more than a license to serve others and to help them move. That's all it's become, really. And then we realize, even as we're saying it, that women seem to be able to help people move without the priesthood. And other people outside the church, regardless of their sex, seem to be able to help other people without the priesthood. And then pretty soon the priesthood becomes meaningless as a church, except as the sole authority by which you must, to which you must yield and render
the meaning
obeisance
is
in order
lost
to
and
be
it
admitted
becomes
into
a
the kingdom,
prop.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely agreed. Well, awesome. Just wanted to say hi. Thanks again for the episode. Great
Kendall,
talk.
thank you for watching.
Take it easy.
Okay, thanks.
You know, Terrell Givens, his favorite disco song may be Brick House, but the average Mormon who doesn't want to be persuaded by this, their favorite song is I Will Survive by Gloria Gaynor.
This ties into this moment of Jared Halverson. I mean, women across the board over the last couple of years have had enough. And,
yes,
and
Jared.
One
he
of
really
the
kicked the nest.
Yeah, and one of the things that, again, it's Jared's one data point in a whole string of data points that have happened over the last few years. But women in the church generally go, I'm tired of wearing these garments. They're just not comfortable. They cause issues. I don't want them. I don't want all the sexism in the temple. I don't want 3-hour church.
If only it were just in the temple.
Yeah. The church is reducing its pressure on you to conform to a thing. It's loosening up the rules all over the place. Elder Renlund just admitted that we've been wrong as a church on how we've handled the differences of women and men, and we are going to do better. In other words, the brethren are working behind the scenes to address the issue of there being less women in the church, and they're going to do something.
And I think it's going to amount to you're not going to get the priesthood, but we'll let you make a second helpings for dinner.
It's going to be something.
I think it'll be something like that.
Yeah, it won't be you get to be in the top leadership councils and actually know all the information we know behind the scenes and affect the decisions. No. You might get to give some advice here and there, but you will not get to affect the decision directly. My point being, though, is that the women have had enough. Garments change, sexism out. Church goes from 3 hours to 2 hours. Mormons don't want to do the Mormon thing, the old Mormon way anymore, and they've had enough of their prophets. Prophets say that they're the ones who teach the truth, and only the most naive Mormons actually believe that completely. They know prophets aren't that great for getting great advice from.
Yeah. Frequently, it comes down to when the missionaries are talking or Mormons talking about the great thing about a church is we have a prophet on the earth today who talks to God. And then the completely innocent question comes back, really, what has he said lately?
Yeah. That DNC stopped a long time ago, didn't it? Yeah. The closest we get are official declarations.
Yeah. What would you say? Jesus is coming back soon. Oh, okay. That hasn't been said for the last 2,000 years. Anything else?
Yeah.
Oh, you should pay tithing before you feed your family. Okay, that sounds like it's coming from God. What else? We're going to build all these temples, spend millions and millions of dollars on all these temples that we're building that we have no need for and that people will not go to. They will not be filled. And we are alienating non-Mormon communities right and left in constructing these temples.
And some of their best ideas, if you really sat down with a believer and said, name the best stuff, some of the things would be ideas that actually started at the bottom up, and somebody in the 12 or in the top 15 said, you know what, why don't we adopt that?
By the way, this is something that's been on the slides for Mormonism After Dark for like over a month now, and I've never gotten to it, and I apologize, but there was an individual who's a watcher of the show who lives in Canada, and it had some details on it. Remind me to get to this on Friday, okay? Because they're talking about that they are right now having a pilot program of 1 hour church. So it could be happening. Maybe it'll go worldwide. Maybe that'll be popular in Canada, going from 2 hours to 1 hour of church. It could happen. People might like that.
What does that mean if Mormons, we already know Mormons like 2 hour church better than 3 hour church. What happens if they like 1 hour church better than 2 hour church?
Oh, it's a fait accompli. It's going to happen.
Yeah. Okay. Chuck, I'm going to bring you into the show here. How are you?
How you doing? Are you up here in Washington? It looks like you have a Bigfoot hat on.
Yeah, no, I visited once. It's a lovely place. I did pick up a great little hat.
Did you see a Bigfoot?
I became a Bigfoot there.
I was going to say, that beard, my friend.
That was your straight line to talk about the mirror, but go ahead.
Hey, great episode. I have just been so turned on to this stuff ever since, Wilson, Limon, and Weymouth.
Yes.
I grabbed their book. I read their article. Dan got me into American Apocrypha, and I learned about KJV stuff. So I've just been into it ever since, and this is just blowing my mind here. I learned a few things too, I think, from Clarke. And if you got a few minutes, I might tickle you here with a few of them.
Can you go to the number one just for our audience's sake? Because I've blathered on for almost 3 hours now. So give us the best one you've got. Is that okay, Chuck?
Sure. It's about the introduction here to Isaiah that Clarke does. And there's
Does
several
he say greater the words of Isaiah in there? I didn't look.
Almost. Maybe the first most interesting thing that gets close is it's written by Clarke in Millbrook, New York on 9/23/1823.
Yeah, I think it would be published there because I think he wrote it in England.
Yeah,
Am I wrong?
you're correct.
Okay,
I think you're
but
correct.
published
I
there.
think
Yeah.
that date is very interesting to me, but that's not the key thing here.
Okay.
And then he opens up and he talks in the very first paragraph. He brings up, prophets, and he even calls them a declarer, which is interesting because that's the word Phelps uses when he conflates Urim and Thummim, the spectacles, and declarers all in one in July 1832. I
Hmm.
thought that was interesting.
That is interesting, Chuck. Just before you go to the next thing, I have to announce that it's quite likely that he was actually from Ireland. So I don't want any Irish people getting mad at me. They're like the last people you want to get mad at you, as the Irish. So he may have well been an Irish minister as opposed to English. I'm just saying. Okay.
Understood. But
Continue.
then just in a couple of paragraphs, all of a sudden, Clarke is explaining prophets and seers, and he's using them together in that terminology, prophets and seers, over and over and over. In fact, inside the next 3 paragraphs, he says it 4 times.
Does he ever say that a seer is greater than a prophet?
Not explicitly here, but I think you can probably draw that out in further things. After reading the introduction, the next thing he goes into ranking the prophets, and you get to where he ranks Joseph, Moses, and Aaron together. And when you combine the seer information with what's going on with the prophet naming, you can almost get the text out of 2 Nephi chapter 3. This is the famous
Joseph?
chapter. Yeah. This is the famous chapter where Joseph declares himself as seer and coming in the future out of Joseph's loins, etc.
Claiming that he's quoting from a lost prophecy of Joseph of old.
That's correct. And not only does it go on to describe seers in the opening of that, it then goes on to describe Joseph, Moses, and Aaron in that order in chapter 3 as well. And there's no reason to really be expounding on Moses and Aaron's callings there. That's already redundant with the brass plates. It's also available to the Jews and Gentiles. So it's kind of an anomaly, but when you see it in this context, all combined here in the introduction to Isaiah by Clarke, it starts to leak out. And this is just a few chapters before he launches into Isaiah verbatim, chapter for chapter. So I thought that was an interesting thing.
It is.
And
I think that this Adam Clarke connection is going to be yielding all kinds of studies and connections that people are going to search for and find.
And by the way, AI is going to help sort of figure out connections that the human eye doesn't see. Just a word to the LDS Church: this doesn't get better. This gets worse over time. The connections that scholars find, the connections that technology will find, the ability to see things that other people don't see, this argument is going to get worse and worse. Look at what's happened in the last 20 years. We used to be able to say the Book of Mormon is just an ancient translation. The only reason Blake Ostler posits an expansion theory is because the evidence became overwhelming to him that he had to account for 19th century material in the book, and it's only gotten worse from there.
Imagine how overwhelming the evidence has to be against the Book of Mormon in order for somebody to come up with a crackpot theory like the expansion idea.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, thank you, Chuck. I appreciate very much that. That was a really cool insight. I love the hierarchy similarity between Adam Clarke with Joseph and Seers versus the Book of Mormon, Nephi's own account. And it seems like maybe Joseph was doing some direct borrowing there as well.
I think maybe I could speculate that this is probably, if you mapped it out time-wise, this is when he's introducing Cowdery to translating, and he's trying to explain to him how it's done, right? And he's expressing why a seer is greater and how to do searing and why he can't do it. And then all of a sudden, magically, that chapter, 2 Nephi chapter 3, comes out of Clarke here.
Yeah, it's almost like that if Joseph Smith in the Book of Mormon is going to say rank a seer is higher than a prophet, you know what Joseph Smith is going to be. He's going to be a seer. You know what I mean?
He is.
Absolutely. He's going to be top dog.
Anyway, there's more here. I think
2 Nephi 3 talks about Joseph, a seer will come forth, and he will be a seer, and he'll be, the fruit of your loins. Not to mention the fruit of your looms.
Yeah. Hey, Chuck, will you join us come into the studio on Mormonism After Dark and share another one of these? We'd love to
Oh yeah, there's
re-engage some
There's
more
more
of
here.
this. So yeah, please
Absolutely.
come into the studio on Friday night and let's hear another one from you.
That
Yeah,
would be great.
thanks
Part
for
of what I'll
having
be
me
doing.
tonight.
Part of what I'll be doing Friday night is what we don't have time for tonight. I did actually cut some stuff out, folks, a lot, believe it or not, which is the story behind this story of this discovery, at least insofar as I'm involved in it and aware of it, because it goes back years.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Chuck. Have a
Thanks,
great day.
Chuck. Good night.
All right. 2 phone calls and then we'll get folks out of here. All right. What's the name? Caller?
Hi, this is Anne.
Anne, how are you?
Ominous.
And ominous.
I'm good. How are y'all tonight?
Are
Yes.
you anonymous?
Hello.
That is a great name.
Why, thank you. Thank you. I was the originator of the genital wart radio.
Oh, I know. You'll go down in history for that. Carden has a picture of you taped up to the inside wall of his jailhouse cell. And when he does chin-ups in the morning, he's focused on your picture because you're the one he's going to go after when he gets out.
I love it. I'm ready.
Well, great.
Well,
yeah.
I guess, yeah. Sorry. So just the last caller, fascinating stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Just to piggyback off of how much Joseph Smith, I'm finding more and more just is borrowing things. Y'all were talking about Harmony, Pennsylvania tonight, and I just did some quick Googling on that. He was living there with Emma between 1827 and 30. And Harmony was just being settled. It was starting in 1824. So just a few years before, but it's a community settled by the Harmony Society, they call themselves. And they were really focused on building up the economy. So they had a clothing factory, sawmill, tannery, distillery, hotels, lumber mills, all this stuff. So I can't help it seeing Joseph Smith saw that, the success of that, and that influenced him in Nauvoo and such. The funny thing about them is they believed in celibacy, this Harmony Society. So they eventually died out, and maybe Joseph Smith saw the writing on the wall and counteracted that with polygamy.
He went the other way, you're saying. He didn't want to die out.
Yeah, exactly.
So he puts a passage in the Book of Mormon that says, raising up seed unto me.
Live long and prosper.
That's the exception, right? That's when polygamy can be practiced. So you don't die out.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, so I just thought that was interesting. Just another example of him, possibly being influenced and, borrowing things for later on.
Very interesting, anonymous.
Yeah.
Is it anonymous or ominous?
Ominous.
Yeah, I thought it was a little more sinister.
It's more on the sinister side for sure.
I like it.
Have a great day. Thank you for the call.
Thanks, Ann.
Thank you, gentlemen. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
I was telling you, we've got one more call here. I was telling you earlier, when you look at high demand religion, what people would call cults, often they are founded by somebody who's really unhealthy. L. Ron Hubbard, Some Young Moon. I could name others, but I might get in trouble with very big religion. But they create scriptures. Some Young Moon did that. L. Ron Hubbard writes Dianetics. This idea that there's a high demand, unhealthy, false religion created by a founder who wants power, influence, wants money, wants sex. And you look at Joseph Smith and you go, he starts a bank under all the terms that we laid out. He's the general of the Nauvoo Legion. He's the mayor of Nauvoo. He runs for president of the United States. He has sex with women and girls. He is doing what founders of high demand false religions do all the time. And yet, in order to make Mormonism true, you have to come up with two excuses. One is that Mormonism isn't a cult, although all the rest of them are. Mormonism isn't an unhealthy high demand religion like the rest of them. And its leader also isn't one of those guys. It's a really true good guy who just happens to be doing all these things with righteous motivations behind him. But yes, the data points are, it looks like from the outside, greed, money, power, influence.
It pained Joseph Smith to have sex with all those women. It pained him.
Yeah. And I'm just saying the more rational point of view is just to go, why shouldn't we just throw him in the same box with all the other guys, all the other
Otherwise,
L. Hubbards?
It's special pleading.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it's special pleading. And more what I see, and I don't want to mention any names because some of these people are my friends, but more and more, the evidence against Mormonism and against Joseph Smith is getting to be so enormous that many people, while not abandoning belief, get backed up against the wall of the translation process of the Book of Mormon. I know you know this has happened too. I can't explain that, and I can't explain this, and I can't explain some other thing. But the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon was translated in 60 to 90 days by Joseph Smith, and no human being could have done that without the aid of God. Therefore, all your other arguments, which I acknowledge I got no answer to because they seem pretty bad to me, they get trumped by the translation process of the Book of Mormon and its very existence. But what we're talking about tonight cuts at the root of that as well.
Yes. And all I'll add to that is these other guys created things too. Sun Young Moon created sacred text, the divine principle.
He did.
Chen Song Gung, yes, called Heavenly Scripture. Peace messages. The Jehovah's Witnesses have their inspired version of the Bible.
It's a translation, yeah.
Yeah, L. Ron Hubbard writes Dianetics and implores that this is the greatest discovery for humanity ever.
Yeah.
You've got the Urantia text. You've got Krishna Melka, who claims to have written the sealed portion. Writing a book of scripture is what founders of high demand religions do. Joseph Smith isn't unique or special. And then, as you're pointing out, now you get into the translation itself. So it doesn't only have problems in comparison with other founders of other religions, with other created sacred texts. It also has problems when you look at the translation itself. And it looks like Joseph Smith is taking a dozen things from his milieu, and he's creating the Book of Mormon from it. And none of the translation is the way we were told it was.
Right. And there are books and books full of scriptural texts that were accepted by one group or other as scriptural, whether it's pseudepigrapha from the Old Testament or apocrypha from the New Testament. Books that were written in the vein of scriptural texts, just like the ones we have in the Bible, that didn't make it into the final cut, into the final list that we have today. And some were closer to being in there, and some were on some people's lists, and others were never really on very many people's lists, and people regarded them very highly. But what we have is stacks and stacks of purported scriptural texts that did not make it into the Bible. So what that shows us is that, yeah, for a very, very long time, people have been writing scripture, or at least scripture that they were writing books that they were pawning off as scripture.
In the 1830s, this is when the Jehovah's Witnesses originate. This is when the Seventh-day Adventists originate. Their take, I get a little earlier, a little later.
Okay. They come from the Adventist movement. It's all okay. They sort of spring from the same thing, but that's going on. And you got the Adventist movement. Is it William Miller who predicted that Jesus would come again in something like the early 1840s?
Keep on believing. Yep, they keep on believing, and Anne, what's her name, takes over. My point being is that this is a moment in America where creative new religions are taking hold, and Mormonism takes hold too at this time. All right, last call of the night. I believe the name is Andrew. Andrew, how are you tonight?
Hello, thank you. Can you hear me?
Hear you great, my friend.
Andrew.
Perfect. This was a great episode, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This is one for the record books, isn't it?
Yeah. It is for sure. And this is, even though $42, that is a lot. It's still I'm gonna have to think about it.
You could get a lot of copies of the Book of Mormon for $42.
That's right. Well, and you can buy anything in this world with money.
You got a lot of it, yeah, or enough.
Yeah. On my mission, I actually came across the NRSV Oxford, the Red Bible.
Did you?
I served. I served in 2009 and 2010.
Where?
And by the end of my mission, I was in Texas.
Yeehaw!
So yeehaw, yeah. I was just starved for something meaty, like, something that I could really chew on. I had actually also been reading Bart Ehrman books on my mission.
What are you doing? What is your companion doing? Where is he?
He is. Most, like, some of the companions didn't really care, and some of them I tucked it under my pillow and read it in the morning like that. So yeah.
Okay, you're reading. Where did you get this?
Here's a second. So it all started with my dad when I had asked him about some questions I had about New Testament translation. He ended up just giving me a Bart Ehrman book. He's the one that gave me the first Bart Ehrman book, and he's a member. He is and he didn't really give me any specific instruction. Just go read this book. So
You remember what the title was?
Yeah, that's when I first learned. The one that he gave me was called Lost Scriptures, and that one's it's mostly just an anthology of apocryphal books with a little bit of commentary.
Yeah, his translation.
Those are the weird stories where you are John the Baptist gets his head cut off and milk comes out instead of blood. Just some weird stories.
Much more nourishing that way. By the way, I got that book right over here on my bookshelf.
Oh, yeah. That is great. Yeah. And after I looked at that, I ended up going to the bookstore and got Misquoting Jesus and Jesus Interrupted.
Yes.
Both of those books. And those two are very similar books. But Misquoting Jesus in particular informed me of the subtle differences between the testaments in terms of Jesus's personality. I thought that was especially interesting. And then the blood, the atonement in Gethsemane, how that blood is an added text.
And you've been here long enough, you saw we covered that part?
Yeah. That's the stuff that I ended up reading this stuff when I ended up getting the NRSV.
Did you also wonder how it showed up in Mosiah in King Benjamin's discourse?
Yeah. I was wondering about, I ended up getting really into Isaiah. And so I had learned about Deutero-Isaiah and the textual criticism theory of there being a second and third author of Isaiah.
Right.
That really racks my brain, because then I'm thinking, oh, Nephi can't. He's reading off of the translation that he wouldn't have had access to. So the rest of them. So it's King Benjamin. So I remember that being like a pretty critical time in my life, like an interesting time, but a confusing time, where I was learning a lot during the end of my mission. and getting, like, by the end, I was pretty disillusioned about everything. So,
Yeah.
The Apocrypha, the Apocrypha that we were talking about this evening, and the after the Old Testament, or the extension of the Old Testament.
Yeah, the intertestamental books, right?
Yes. The Book of Judith was a book that I thought was particularly interesting because
with the beheading and everything.
It's a cool. Well, it's a cool story. It has a plot to it.
Yeah.
There's like a cool narrative that like keeps you going and turning the pages.
It is a good story. Not all the good stories are in the Book of Mormon.
Yeah. Right. Like, honestly, I was really into the war chapters in the Book of Mormon. I was a big fan of, like, the narrow neck of land and the strategy of it. I was, like, super interested in that.
My friend who gave me my first copy of the Book of Mormon really tried to sell me on those war chapters as being super great. And when I finally got to them, meh. I didn't find him that great.
Yeah.
It seemed like the same thing going on over and over again with different people.
Yeah. If people are interested in like war texts, the Mahabharata is a Hindu text based off of a war, and it's cool at points, kind of like how it's cool in Alma as well. Actually, it's like 10 times as cool.
Yeah, because what you have in Alma I think what you have in Alma is less like what war really is, and more like what a young frontier boy in America might imagine war to be like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially with a really strict dual sense of, the Nephites are the good guys and the Lamanites are the evil guys.
Yeah, it's very
rather than the
very
mm-hmm.
two sides. Yeah, good.
That changes by the end.
Character.
Yes. That changes by the end. It's more of a political designation than a ancestral designation by the end.
That's true. Lamanite. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Andrew. I appreciate very much the call.
But millions and millions. That's right. In other words, this young man imagines vast,
have a great night.
Vast armies with millions of soldiers, without understanding how huge the civilization would have to be to produce and sustain such an army, not only on one side, but on the other side, because you're fighting against each other. And how in his youthful enthusiasm for warfare, he creates armies that are larger than have ever fought for any country, no matter how large, in the history of the whole freaking world. The biggest armies are in the Book of Mormon, with no archaeological evidence of their existence.
The number of absurd things that you have to believe in order for Mormonism to be true. I put a list of these together. I'll just put it in the live chat. Folks can go to that if they want to. It's all the things you sort of have to hold in your head as being true, even though they're irrational. Sort of crazy. And tonight we put one more, much bigger than this one, but one more thing on top of the pile on the shelf that's already creaking and bowed and seems to be cracking.
There's so much contradictory stuff in the average Mormon's head. This is why Mormons are known, especially in Utah, to sometimes be walking around minding their own business, and their head suddenly explodes.
Yeah, well,
it happens. There's a name for that.
Yeah. So great episode tonight, RFM.
It goes on the death certificate. It's called Mormon Exploding Head Syndrome.
Yeah. Yep. Let's start off.
MEHS, Mormon Exploding Head Syndrome. You heard it here, folks.
Little dissonance, eventually explosion.
You ready to take me out, my friend?
Yeah, you go ahead and end the show. This was your show.
Or are you ready for me to take us out?
You take us out.
Okay. Everybody, thank you so much for watching this great show. I think this has been a really, really important show on Mormonism Live. If we see further than others, and we do, it's only because we stand on the shoulders of giants, chiefly Colby Townsend tonight, and some of the other individuals that we've mentioned, like Haley Wilson Lamont, and also the professor. I am always having trouble with his name.
Thomas Wayman.
Thank you, Thomas Wayman. There's Huggins. Also, Stan Larson, the greats and the near greats have all been on parade tonight. And I consider myself one of the near greats.
I think you're right, by the way. Haley Lamont
Wilson.
Yes, Wilson. I think when she was doing the interview with me, she wasn't married yet and then was married after. So I think that's true.
I thought so. Okay. So anyway, everybody, thanks so much for joining us. Please share this with your friends. This has been a deep dive. This has been beyond a deep dive. This has been like, this has been advanced course all night long. Thank you so much. We have the best audience, I think, in the business and the most intelligent. And I gave a long intro in order to help usher in people who might not have the background, but also knowing full well that at least half of the people who watch the show know all the stuff I was talking about with those variants in the New Testament at the first half hour or so of the show. But thank you for bearing with us and bearing with me. And I hope that what you have heard tonight is exciting and interesting to you. And let the word go forth from here that apparently Joseph Smith did use the Adam Clarke Bible commentary, not only in his Joseph Smith translation of the Bible, but also in his translation of the Book of Mormon. Make of that what you will. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. And join us Friday, this coming Friday, 8:00 p.m. Mountain Time for Mormonism After Dark. Thanks again. See you, everybody, next week on Mormonism Live next Wednesday. Good night.